The pencil shouldn't have mattered, just a splintered piece of wood and graphite left behind in the chaos of twisted metal and blood. But for Charlotte Pierce, billionaire CEO, lying in a hospital bed with fractured ribs and a concussion, it was the only thread connecting her to the man who'd pulled her from death's grip and vanished like smoke. She'd built an empire on never leaving debts unpaid, and she owed this stranger everything. The problem? He didn't want to be found. But Charlotte Pierce had never taken no for an answer. Stay with me until the end of this story, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The morning Eli Turner saved a life, he'd been thinking about pancakes. Not the fancy kind with berries and whipped cream that Noah kept seeing in the cooking shows at the library, just simple buttermilk pancakes with the maple syrup he'd been rationing since mid-October. Money was tight. It was always tight. But it was Saturday, and Saturdays meant something special for breakfast, even if special just meant he'd use an extra egg. "Dad, can we get the radio working?" Noah asked from the passenger seat of Eli's '98 Ford pickup, his breath fogging the window as he traced patterns in the condensation. The boy was 8 years old, all knobby knees and curious eyes, wearing a jacket 2 sizes too big, a hand-me-down from the church donation box. "Radio's been dead for 3 months, buddy. You know that." Eli adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, his calloused hands rough from years of engine grease and manual labor. "But I'll hum you something if you want." "Please don't," Noah said with the kind of gentle honesty only children can deliver without cruelty. "You sound like a sick moose." Eli barked out a laugh, the sound echoing in the cab's cramped interior. "Your mama used to say the same thing." The mention of Sarah, gone 2 years now to cancer that had eaten through their savings before it ate through her, settled between them like it always did. Not heavy, not anymore, just present. A third passenger they'd learned to make room for. The road stretched ahead, Route 402, cutting through rural Pennsylvania like a gray ribbon, trees pressing close on either side. Dawn was just breaking, painting the sky in shades of pearl and rose. Eli had taken this route 1,000 times, heading into Millbrook for early morning shifts at Henderson's Auto Repair. The Saturday morning shift paid time and a half, and Henderson was decent about letting Noah hang around the office, doing homework or drawing in his sketchbook. "Dad, look at that mist," Noah said, pressing his face closer to the window. "It's like we're driving through a cloud." The boy was right. Fog had rolled in thick overnight, clinging to the hollows and valleys, turning the familiar landscape ghostly. Eli slowed the truck, headlights cutting weak tunnels through the gray. This was black ice weather, the kind that could send you sideways before you even realized the road had gone slick. "Keep your eyes sharp," Eli said, more to himself than Noah. "Visibility's maybe 20 feet. They rounded the bend near the old Hutchinson place, abandoned since the foreclosure 3 years back, and that's when Eli saw it. Or rather, felt it first, a deep wrongness in the air, the way you can sense a thunderstorm building even before the first rumble. Then the headlights caught it. Metal, chrome, glass. All of it wrong, all of it twisted. A silver Bentley. And even through the fog, Eli could tell it was a Bentley because he'd rebuilt enough luxury cars to know precision engineering when he saw it, had wrapped itself around the massive oak tree that stood sentinel at the road's edge. The tree that had been there since before the road was paved, that had weathered a century of Pennsylvania winters. The tree had won this fight. "Jesus," Eli breathed, already slamming his foot on the brake. The truck's worn pad squealed in protest, and he threw his arm across Noah's chest instinctively, protectively, even though the boy was belted in. "Stay in the truck." "Dad, is someone—" "Stay in the truck." Eli's voice came out harder than he meant it to, but there was no time to soften it. He was already out, boots hitting wet pavement, fog swallowing him the moment he left the truck's dome light behind. The cold hit like a physical force, November air sharp enough to sting his lungs. He could hear it now, the tick-tick-tick of hot metal cooling, the hiss of something leaking, and underneath it all, a sound that made his stomach drop, a wet, labored breathing. Someone was alive in there. The Bentley's front end had crumpled like an accordion, the hood buckled upward, steam or smoke, Eli couldn't tell which, rising from the engine block. The windshield had spider-webbed into 1,000 fractures, and the driver's side door hung at an angle that defied physics. Hello? Eli called out, already moving toward the wreck. His mechanic's brain was cataloging details automatically. The way the frame had buckled, the deployment pattern of the airbags, the angle of impact. High speed. No skid marks he could see. Either the driver hadn't seen the turn in the fog, or something had happened. Medical emergency, mechanical failure, distraction. The why didn't matter. Only the who. He reached the driver's side and his breath caught. Through the shattered window he could see her, a woman, mid-30s maybe, dark hair matted with blood, slumped against the deployed airbag. Her face was turned toward him, pale as the fog itself, and for one terrible moment he thought he was too late. Then her eyes fluttered open. Help! The word came out as barely more than a whisper, bubbling through blood on her lips. Please. I've got you, Eli said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline dumping into his system. I've got you. Don't move, okay? Don't try to move. Her eyes struggled to focus on him, pupils different sizes, concussion, definitely, maybe worse. There was a deep gash across her forehead, blood sheeting down the side of her face, and her left arm was bent at an angle that made his stomach turn. The door was jammed. Eli pulled, braced his boot against the frame, and pulled again. The metal groaned, but didn't give. Behind him, he heard the truck door open. Noah, I said, you need help, his son said, already at his side, small hands gripping the door's edge above where Eli's hands held. The boy was terrified. Eli could see it in the white around his eyes. But he was there anyway. Pride and fear warred in Eli's chest, but there was no time for either. On three, 1, 2, 3. They pulled together, Noah's small strength added to his father's, and something in the door's twisted frame gave way. It opened maybe 8 inches. Not enough to pull her through, but enough to reach in. Ma'am, I'm going to check you over, okay? I need to see how bad you're hurt. Eli's hands were already moving, checking her neck, her spine. His knowledge came from a first aid course he'd taken years ago when Sarah was pregnant, and from a lifetime of understanding how broken things worked, or didn't work. No obvious spinal deformity. That was good. But she was cold, too cold, going into shock. The blood from her head wound was slowing, also good, but her breathing was shallow and rapid. Can't feel my legs, she managed. That might be the way you're positioned, Eli said, though his gut twisted. We're going to get you out, I promise. He looked back at Noah. Run to the truck. There's a blanket behind the seat and the red toolbox in the bed. Bring both. Fast. Noah took off at a sprint, his small form disappearing into the fog. Eli turned back to the woman. Her eyes were trying to close. Hey, no, stay with me. What's your name? Char. She coughed, and more blood appeared at the corner of her mouth. Internal bleeding. Shit. Charlotte. Charlotte. That's a beautiful name. I'm Eli. You're going to be okay, Charlotte. You're going to be fine. He was lying. He had no idea if she was going to be fine, but people needed something to hold on to, and hope was better than nothing. You live around here? Was driving to meeting. Each word seemed to cost her. Philadelphia, late, stupid. Not stupid, just unlucky. We all push it sometimes. He was working while he talked, trying to see if there was any way to get the door open wider. The frame was too bent. He'd need cutting tools, time they didn't have. Noah reappeared, dragging the wool blanket and carrying the toolbox with both hands. Dad, should I call 911? Mrs. Henderson showed me how to use her phone. No signal out here, buddy. Eli had already checked his own phone, ancient flip phone with a cracked screen, and gotten nothing. But there's a house about 2 miles back, the Martins. You remember them? The ones with the mean dog? Dog's tied up. You run there, you bang on that door until someone answers, and you tell them to call 911 and send an ambulance to the oak tree on Route 402. Can you do that? Noah's eyes went wide. You want me to leave you? I need you to be brave. Can you be brave for me? The boy looked at the woman in the car, then back at his father, and something in his young face hardened with determination that made him look suddenly older. I can be brave. That's my boy. Run. Fast as you can. Noah took off, his footsteps fading into the fog, and Eli was alone with Charlotte and the ticking wreck. He spread the blanket awkwardly through the gap in the door, trying to cover her as much as he could. She was shivering now, which was somehow both concerning and reassuring. Shivering meant her body was still fighting. "Cold," she whispered. "I know. I'm sorry." On impulse, Eli shrugged out of his flannel shirt, leaving him in just a thin undershirt. The cold immediately bit through to his skin, but he managed to work the flannel through the door gap and tuck it around her shoulders. It was probably useless given her position, but it was something. "Why?" Charlotte's eyes struggled to focus on him. "Why are you helping?" "Because you need help. That's reason enough." He positioned himself where she could see him without moving her head, his hand finding hers, cold, delicate fingers, nothing like his own scarred and oil-stained hands. "You just hold on. Help's coming." "Was going to buy a painting," she said, and Eli realized she was drifting, shock making her thoughts scatter. "Rothko always wanted a Rothko. The red ones. Like fire." "You'll get your painting," Eli said. "You're going to walk into that gallery yourself and pick out the best one they've got. Talk to me, please, so tired." So Eli talked. He told her about Noah, about how the kid could draw anything he saw, had a gift for it. He told her about the truck he was restoring in the garage behind their house, a '67 Mustang that had been his father's, that he was fixing up panel by panel whenever he had spare money for parts. He told her about the diner in town that made the best apple pie in 3 counties, about the way the creek behind his house sounded when it rained, about the deer that came through his yard every evening at dusk. He talked, and he held her hand, and he kept her eyes open, and he prayed. Time became elastic. It might have been 10 minutes or 40 when he finally heard the sirens. The sound started distant, then grew, and then there were lights cutting through the fog, red and blue and white, painting the trees in urgent color. "See? Told you," Eli said, squeezing Charlotte's hand. "Help's here. You're going to be fine." Paramedics swarmed the scene with practiced efficiency, and Eli stepped back to give them room. They had tools he didn't, knowledge he didn't, equipment that could actually save her. He was suddenly aware of how useless he was, how little he'd actually done except keep her conscious and warm. "Sir, are you injured?" One of the EMTs, a young woman with kind eyes, was suddenly at his elbow. "What? No, I'm fine. I just found her. You're hypothermic. Your lips are blue." She was already wrapping a reflective emergency blanket around his shoulders. "Sit in our rig, now. I need to wait for my son. The boy's fine. He's with Sheriff Morrison. Got the call through like a champ." She guided him firmly toward the ambulance. "You did good, but you can't help anyone if you freeze to death." Eli let himself be led, his legs suddenly shaky. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving him hollowed out and trembling. Through the ambulance's open back doors, he could see them working on Charlotte. They'd gotten the door open with hydraulic spreaders, and now they were carefully extracting her from the wreck, stabilizing her neck and spine. "Is she going to make it?" he asked. The EMT, her name tag read Rodriguez, gave him the kind of non-committal look healthcare professionals must practice in the mirror. "They're doing everything they can. You got to her fast. That matters." Sheriff Morrison appeared, his weathered face creased with concern, Noah's hand in his. The boy broke free and ran to Eli, crashing into him with enough force to make him grunt. "You're okay," Noah said into his chest. "You're okay." "Of course I'm okay." Eli wrapped his arms around his son, felt the boy's heart hammering against his ribs. "You did perfect, buddy. You were so brave." "The lady?" "They're taking care of her." They watched as the paramedics loaded Charlotte onto a backboard, then a gurney, then into the ambulance. Her face was obscured by an oxygen mask, her body strapped down and wrapped in warming blankets. She looked small, fragile, completely unlike the person Eli had imagined driving a car that probably cost more than his house. "Mr. Turner, I'm going to need a statement," Sheriff Morrison said. "But it can wait until you've warmed up. You want to ride to the hospital, get checked out?" "No hospital." Eli's voice came out more forcefully than he intended. Hospitals cost money he didn't have, and there was nothing wrong with him that hot coffee and dry clothes wouldn't fix. "I'm fine." "Sir, you should really—" Rodriguez started. "I said I'm fine." He softened it with a slight smile. But thank you, really, for everything. The ambulance carrying Charlotte pulled away, sirens wailing, and Eli watched its lights disappear into the fog. He had a strange, dislocating feeling that he'd just witnessed something important, a hinge moment where one path split into two. But that was just the cold talking, making him melodramatic. "Come on," he said to Noah, guiding him back toward their truck. "Let's get you home and warm. We've got pancakes to make." "What about your shirt, Dad?" Eli looked down at himself, at the undershirt now damp and clinging to his skin. He'd forgotten about the flannel, left tucked around a dying woman in a Bentley. "I've got others." As they climbed into the truck, blessedly warm from being left running, something caught Eli's eye in the footwell. A pencil, yellow, wooden, the cheap kind he used for marking measurements in the garage. It must have fallen from his shirt pocket when he'd leaned into the wreck. He almost left it there. Just a pencil, worth maybe 2 cents. But something made him pick it up instead, tuck it into his front pocket where it pressed against his chest like a talisman. Evidence that he'd been there, that the last hour had been real and not some fog-induced hallucination. "Will she be okay?" Noah asked as Eli pulled the truck back onto the road, driving slowly past the wreck scene now lit up with emergency lights. "I don't know, buddy. I hope so." "Me too. She had sad eyes." Out of the mouths of babes. "Yeah, she did, didn't she?" They drove home in silence, and Eli made the pancakes and Noah drowned them in syrup, and the day continued as days do, 1 minute folding into the next. By evening, the morning's drama had taken on the quality of something that had happened to someone else, some other man in some other life. Eli didn't think about the woman named Charlotte, about her cold hand in his, or the way she'd whispered his name like a prayer. He didn't wonder if she'd survived, if she'd woken up in some hospital room, if she'd remember the stranger who'd pulled her from the wreck. He had a life to live, bills to pay, a son to raise. Heroes in stories might chase down the people they saved, might form eternal bonds forged in crisis. But Eli Turner wasn't a hero. He was just a mechanic who'd done what anyone would do. He'd saved a life, then gone home and made pancakes. The pencil stayed in his pocket, and by the next morning, he'd forgotten it was there. And Charlotte Pierce, lying in intensive care 30 miles away, sedated and wrapped in bandages, her broken body being slowly reassembled by surgeons who cost more per hour than Eli made in a month, would spend the next 3 weeks trying to remember the face of the man who'd saved her. All she had was fragments, oil and pine scent, calloused hands, a voice that had pulled her back from the edge of nothing. And somewhere in the fog of pain medication and fractured memory, a name. Eli. It wasn't much, but Charlotte Pierce hadn't built a billion-dollar empire by accepting not much as an answer. She'd made her fortune finding value in what others overlooked, seeing potential in what seemed broken beyond repair. And she always paid her debts. Always. The pencil would find its way back to her eventually, carried by a nurse who found it tucked into the flannel shirt they'd cut off her in the ER. By then, it would be her only lead, the single thread connecting her to a man who'd vanished into the fog without even giving his last name. But that story, the story of the search, of the masks they'd wear and the truths they'd tell, of a billionaire learning to be human and a mechanic discovering he deserved to be seen, that story was still waiting in the wings, patient as the Pennsylvania winter. For now, in a small house at the edge of Millbrook, Eli Turner tucked his son into bed, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "Love you, buddy. Sleep tight." "Love you too, Dad. We did good today, didn't we?" "We did good." And in the darkness, neither of them knowing how that single morning would reshape their entire world, they slept. Charlotte Pierce woke up 17 times before she actually woke up. The first time, there were only fragments, white ceiling tiles, the mechanical whisper of machines, pain that existed everywhere and nowhere at once. Someone was saying her name, but it came from very far away, like hearing your own name called from the bottom of a well. The second time, she managed to open her eyes long enough to see her assistant Marcus hovering over her, his normally composed face cracked with worry. She tried to tell him about the fog, about the tree that had come out of nowhere, about hands that had held hers while she died and didn't die, but her mouth wouldn't form the words. The third through 16th times blurred together into a morphine haze of doctors and nurses, of her brother James flying in from London, of lawyers and board members who needed decisions she couldn't make, of pain that came in waves and then receded when someone pushed something into her IV line. The 17th time, she actually woke up. The pain was still there, but it had consolidated, become specific. Her left arm throbbed in its cast. Her ribs screamed every time she breathed. Her head felt like someone had taken a hammer to her skull and used it for drumming practice. But her mind was clear for the first time in what turned out to be 3 weeks. "Welcome back," a nurse said, noticing her open eyes. The woman was in her 50s, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun, and the kind of competent warmth that came from decades of keeping people alive. Her name tag read Patricia Mills, RN. "How are you feeling, Ms. Pierce?" Charlotte's throat was raw from the breathing tube they'd removed 2 days ago. "Like I got hit by a tree." Patricia smiled. "Technically, you hit the tree, but I appreciate the humor. That's a good sign." She was already checking monitors, making notes on a tablet. "Do you remember the accident?" "Fog. I remember fog." Charlotte closed her eyes, trying to pull the memories into focus. "I was late. Conference call with the Tokyo office fell apart, and I was supposed to be in Philadelphia by 8, driving too fast, couldn't see. And then the impact, metal shrieking, the world turning sideways, cold seeping into her bones, and then, impossibly, warmth." "There was someone," Charlotte said, her eyes snapping open. "A man. He pulled me out." "The first responders." "No, before them. He was there before them." The memory was swimming up through the fog of trauma and medication, becoming clearer. "He talked to me, kept me awake. He gave me his shirt." She could almost smell it now, motor oil and pine needles and something else, something like sawdust and honest work. "Where is he? Did he leave his name?" Patricia's expression shifted, became careful. "Ms. Pierce, you were alone when the ambulance arrived. The paramedics found you trapped in the vehicle. A young boy had run 2 miles to get help, but there was no man at the scene." "That's impossible. He was there. I held his hand. His name was—" She grasped for it, found it waiting. "Eli. He said his name was Eli." "The shock can sometimes create false memories," Patricia said gently. "The brain's way of coping with trauma." "I'm not imagining this." Charlotte tried to sit up, and her ribs immediately punished her for the attempt. She gasped, and Patricia was there, easing her back down. "Easy. You've got 3 broken ribs, a fractured arm, a severe concussion, and you just came off a ventilator. You're not imagining anything, but you need to rest. Your body's been through hell." Charlotte forced herself to breathe slowly, carefully. "The shirt. You said I was wearing his shirt when they found me. A flannel. What happened to it?" Patricia hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Hold on." She disappeared for a few minutes, and Charlotte stared at the ceiling, reconstructing the memory piece by piece. He'd been real. She knew he'd been real. The sound of his voice, the calluses on his hands, the way he'd told her about his son who could draw, about a Mustang he was restoring. Those weren't the fever dreams of a dying brain. They were too specific, too grounded. Patricia returned carrying a plastic hospital bag. Inside was a flannel shirt, cut up the back where the ER staff had removed it, stained with blood and dirt. "We kept your personal effects. The shirt wasn't yours, so we bagged it separately in case someone came looking." Charlotte reached for it with her good hand, and Patricia helped her pull it close enough to see. It was old, worn soft from years of washing, the kind of thing that cost maybe $20 new and got better with age. The collar was frayed. There was a patch on one elbow that had been sewn on by hand, the stitches crooked but functional, and there, in the front pocket, something hard and cylindrical. "Can you—" Charlotte gestured, and Patricia reached in, pulling out a yellow pencil. Basic, wooden, the kind you'd buy in a pack of 20 at any hardware store. It was splintered near the eraser, like it had been dropped or stepped on. Charlotte took it, turned it over in her fingers. There was no name on it, no marking except for some faint graphite smudges. But holding it, she felt a certainty settle into her bones. The same certainty that had guided her through 1,000 business deals. This was real. He was real. "I want to find him," she said. Patricia's expression cycled through concern, doubt, and finally resignation. "Miss Pierce, I really think you should focus on recovery right now. Your doctors say you'll need at least 3 months of physical therapy and 3 months to find one man? I've closed international mergers in less time. Charlotte looked at the pencil, at the flannel, at the evidence of kindness from a stranger who'd vanished like smoke. He saved my life and didn't even stay for a thank you. Why would someone do that? Maybe he had somewhere to be. Maybe he was afraid of getting involved. Maybe, Patricia shrugged. Maybe he was just a good person who didn't need recognition. The thought sat uncomfortably in Charlotte's chest. In her world, everyone wanted something. Every kindness came with strings attached. Every gesture had an angle. The idea of pure altruism, of someone risking themselves for a stranger and asking nothing in return, was so foreign it almost hurt to contemplate. I need to thank him, she said finally, and I need... She paused, unsure how to articulate the feeling. I need to know who he is, the man who saw me at my worst and stayed anyway. Patricia studied her for a long moment, then patted her good hand. You rest, you get better. Then you can chase your mysteries. Deal? Deal. But Charlotte was already planning. Because the thing about being a billionaire, the thing people who'd never had money didn't understand, was that wealth didn't just buy things. It bought time, attention, expertise. It bought the ability to make problems solvable. And finding one man in rural Pennsylvania, that was eminently solvable. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of physical therapy, board meetings conducted from her hospital bed, and James hovering like an anxious mother hen. Her brother meant well, but his concern manifested as control, and Charlotte had spent too many years fighting for autonomy to surrender it now, even flat on her back. You should come to London, James said during one of his visits, perched on the chair beside her bed with the uncomfortable posture of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. He'd never been good with hospitals, not since their mother's long decline. Stay at my place. Let Margaret fuss over you. God knows she's been asking about you. I have a company to run. Marcus has been handling things beautifully. The board's pleased with the quarterly numbers. You could take time, Charlotte. You could actually rest. She looked at her brother, older by 4 years, softer in all the ways that mattered and didn't. James had inherited their father's business instincts but lacked the killer edge that had built Pierce Industries from a regional gallery into a global art conglomerate. He'd taken his inheritance and invested safely, lived comfortably, married well. He was happy. Charlotte had never wanted happiness. She'd wanted to win. I'm fine here, she said. You nearly died. But I didn't. She held up the pencil, which she'd kept on her bedside table. Someone made sure I didn't. James followed her gaze, frowned. That? This belonged to the man who saved me. I'm going to find him. Her brother's expression went through several complicated gymnastics before landing on exasperated affection. Of course you are. Because a normal person would just be grateful and move on, but you've never done anything the normal way. It's part of my charm. It's part of your pathology. But he was smiling, and when he left that evening, he kissed her forehead and told her to be careful, which they both knew she wouldn't be. Charlotte was cleared to leave the hospital on a Thursday afternoon, though cleared was a strong word for what amounted to her doctors giving up on keeping her there against her will. She left in a wheelchair pushed by Patricia, who'd somehow become a friend in the weeks of recovery, with Marcus trailing behind carrying bags of medications and printed instructions she had no intention of following. You're supposed to rest, Patricia said as they reached the hospital entrance where a town car waited. Rest means not working 16-hour days. I'll rest when I'm dead. You almost were dead. Maybe that's a sign. Charlotte smiled despite herself. You should have been a therapist instead of a nurse. I am a therapist. I'm just not licensed for the stubborn billionaire specialty. Patricia helped her into the car with practiced efficiency, then handed her a card. That's my personal number. You call if you need anything, understand, anything at all. I will, thank you, Patricia, for everything. Just doing my job. But her eyes were warm as she stepped back and closed the car door. The drive to her penthouse in Pittsburgh should have been restful. Instead, Charlotte spent it on the phone with private investigators. The first 3 were useless, offering platitudes about needle-in-haystack scenarios and reasonable expectations. The 4th was different. Vera Chen answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and no nonsense. Chen Investigations. What are you looking for? Charlotte appreciated the directness. A man. First name Eli. Last name unknown. He was on Route 402 in rural Pennsylvania the morning of October 15th. He had an 8-year-old son. He drives a Ford pickup, probably late 90s model. He's a mechanic, and he saved my life before disappearing. There was a pause, the sound of fingers on a keyboard. You're Charlotte Pierce, the accident. You follow the news. I follow money. Your accident made the financial pages. More typing. This Eli, what do you want with him? I want to thank him. People don't hire private investigators to say thank you. They send fruit baskets. Charlotte smiled despite the pain in her ribs. I'm not a fruit basket kind of person. No, I don't imagine you are. Vera's voice shifted, became considering. Route 402. That's near Millbrook. Small town, maybe 2,000 people. If your mechanic lives there, finding him should be simple. If he doesn't, it gets harder. What's your budget? Whatever it takes. Those are dangerous words, Ms. Pierce. I'm a dangerous woman, Ms. Chen. A laugh, sharp and appreciative. All right, I'll take the case. But I work clean. No harassment, no stalking, nothing that crosses lines. I find your man. I give you his information. What you do after that is your business. We clear? Crystal. Good. I'll be in touch. The line went dead, and Charlotte leaned back against the leather seat, exhausted but satisfied. She'd set things in motion. Now she just had to wait. Waiting had never been her strong suit. Marcus had prepared the penthouse for her return, fresh flowers in every room, the refrigerator stocked, her bedroom converted into something resembling a recovery suite with a hospital bed and enough medical equipment to run a small clinic. He'd even hired a private nurse, though Charlotte sent the woman home within an hour of arriving. I don't need a babysitter, she told Marcus, who looked like he wanted to argue but knew better. You need someone. You can't even dress yourself. Then you can help me dress. She softened it with a smile. Please, I just need space. I need quiet. I've had enough of people hovering. He relented, as he always did, but made her promise to call if she needed anything. Then she was finally alone in the space she'd lived in for 6 years, but had never quite felt like home. Too much glass, too much steel, everything sharp angles and ruthless efficiency. It was beautiful in the way a knife was beautiful, functional, cold, perfect for cutting. Charlotte stood at the window looking out over Pittsburgh's skyline and tried to remember the last time she'd felt warm. Vera called 3 days later. Found him. Eli Turner, 36 years old, widowed, one son named Noah. Runs a small garage in Millbrook, lives in a house on Maple Street. Want the full report? Charlotte's heart was doing something complicated in her chest. Send everything you have. The file arrived within the hour, and Charlotte read it 3 times before she let herself fully absorb the information. Eli Turner had grown up in Millbrook, the only child of a mechanic and a schoolteacher. He'd married Sarah Brennan at 22, had Noah at 28, lost Sarah to ovarian cancer 2 years ago. The medical bills from her treatment had decimated their savings. He worked at Henderson's Auto Repair, took side jobs when he could get them, coached Little League in the summer. He drove a '98 Ford F-150, lived in a modest 3-bedroom that was paid off, and by all accounts was a decent man trying to keep his head above water. There were photos. Eli at Noah's school, helping with a science fair. Eli at the garage, grease-stained and smiling at something off camera. Eli and Noah at the grocery store, the boy riding in the cart despite being too old for it, both of them laughing. He looked exactly like Charlotte remembered, and nothing like she'd expected. Younger than she'd thought, with brown hair that needed cutting and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He was handsome in an understated way, all rough edges and honest work, the kind of attractive that didn't know it was attractive. Looking at his photos, Charlotte felt something crack open in her chest. He looked happy. Not wealthy, not powerful, not any of the things she'd spent her life chasing, just happy. What are you going to do? Marcus asked when she told him she'd found her rescuer. They were in her home office, Charlotte working through contracts despite her doctor's orders, Marcus pretending he wasn't watching her like she might collapse. I'm going to thank him. You could send a check. I'm not sending a check. The thought made her almost angry. I'm going to meet him properly, talk to him, tell him… What? What could she possibly say that would encompass what he'd done, what it meant? Charlotte? Marcus's voice was gentle, the tone he used when he was about to say something she didn't want to hear. What if he doesn't want to be found? He left. He could have stayed, given his name to the paramedics, come to visit you in the hospital. He chose not to. Maybe he was scared. Maybe he thought he'd done enough. Maybe… She stopped, frustrated. I don't know what he thought. That's why I need to talk to him. Or maybe, Marcus said carefully, he did what he did because it was the right thing to do, and he doesn't need anything from you in return. Not gratitude, not money, not anything. The words landed like a punch. Because Marcus was right. Of course he was right. Eli Turner had saved her and walked away because that's what good people did. They didn't calculate angles or expect rewards. They just did the right thing and moved on with their lives. But Charlotte wasn't good at moving on. She was good at acquisition, at pursuit, at getting what she wanted through sheer force of will. And what she wanted was to understand the man who'd held her hand while she died and asked for nothing. I need to see him, she said finally. I need to know why. Marcus sighed, recognized defeat when he saw it. So what's the plan? You show up at his garage in a $50,000 suit and your driver? That'll go over well in a town where the median income is probably $30,000 a year. He had a point. Everything about Charlotte screamed money, from her clothes to her bearing to the way she spoke. She couldn't just walk into Eli Turner's life without causing exactly the kind of disruption she suspected he'd run from. Then I won't be Charlotte Pierce, she said slowly, the idea forming as she spoke. I'll be someone else, someone normal, someone he might actually talk to. You want to lie to him. I want to meet him as a person, not as a walking checkbook. I want… She paused, trying to articulate something she barely understood herself. I want to see the man who saved me without all the noise that comes with my name. Is that so wrong? Marcus looked at her for a long moment, his expression cycling through concern, understanding, and finally acceptance. You're going to do this no matter what I say, aren't you? Yes. Then at least let me help you not completely screw it up. That's how Charlotte Pierce became Lena Shaw. The transformation took 2 weeks of preparation. First, the look. Charlotte cut her hair shorter, traded her designer wardrobe for jeans and simple sweaters from Target, learned to apply makeup that suggested trying but not too hard instead of professional artist at dawn. She bought a used Honda Civic with cash, practiced driving it until the handling felt natural, until she could park without thinking about the Bentley that had nearly killed her. Then, the backstory. Lena Shaw was a freelance graphic designer from Ohio, recently divorced, driving cross-country to clear her head. She was passing through Pennsylvania when her car started making a noise, nothing serious but concerning enough to want a mechanic's opinion. She had enough money to get by but needed to be careful. She was friendly but guarded, the kind of person who'd learned to be careful with trust. It was, Charlotte realized with some irony, the most honest lie she'd ever told. This is insane, Marcus said the night before she left for Millbrook. They were in her penthouse, Charlotte packing a single suitcase with the kind of ordinary clothes she'd never worn in her adult life. You're recovering from a major accident. You should be resting, not running off to play pretend in a small town. I'm fine. The doctors cleared me for light activity. Driving 3 hours and lying to a man who saved your life is not light activity. Charlotte folded a sweater, added it to the suitcase. I'm not lying, I'm just not telling the whole truth. That's literally the definition of lying. Then I'm lying. She looked at him, at her friend and assistant, and the closest thing she had to family besides James. I have to do this, Marcus. I have to know who he is, why he did what he did. And if I show up as myself, with my money and my reputation, all I'll get is what everyone gives me. Deference, distance, people telling me what they think I want to hear. I need real. Just this once, I need something real. Marcus's expression softened. You could just tell him the truth, thank him, offer to help with whatever he needs, and walk away. I could, but I won't. Charlotte closed the suitcase, zipped it shut. I've spent my entire adult life being Charlotte Pierce. Just for a little while, I want to be nobody. I want to see if anyone would like me if I didn't have billions in the bank. People like you just fine. People like my money. It's not the same thing. She left the next morning before sunrise when Pittsburgh was still sleeping and the roads were empty. The Civic drove nothing like the Bentley. Rougher, louder, every bump and imperfection in the road transmitted directly through the seat, but it was honest, no pretense, no luxury cushioning her from the world. The drive to Millbrook took 3 hours through increasingly rural Pennsylvania, the highway giving way to state routes, giving way to county roads that wound through forests and past farms, where horses stood steaming in the cold morning air. Charlotte had grown up in Connecticut privilege, done business in Manhattan penthouses and London boardrooms and Tokyo high-rises. She'd forgotten what America looked like in the spaces between cities, what the country became when you stripped away the urban veneer. It was beautiful in a way that hurt. Honest, weathered, real. Millbrook appeared around a bend in the road like something from a postcard. Main Street lined with brick storefronts, a church with a white steeple, bare trees waiting for winter. Population 1,847 according to the sign. Established 1823. Home of the Millbrook Miners High School football team. Charlotte, Lena, drove through slowly, cataloging details. There was a diner called Rosie's with a parking lot full of pickup trucks, a hardware store with Christmas decorations already in the window, a library, a post office, a bar called the Rusty Nail. And there, on a side street just off Main, Henderson's Auto Repair. She drove past it twice before pulling into the lot. Her heart was hammering in a way that had nothing to do with her injuries and everything to do with fear. What if he recognized her? What if he saw through the disguise immediately? What if he was angry she'd found him? What if he didn't remember her at all? She parked, checked her appearance in the mirror, no makeup, hair unstyled, wearing jeans and a sweater that cost $18, and forced herself to breathe. She'd negotiated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. She'd faced down hostile board members and corporate raiders and journalists looking for blood. She could do this. She got out of the car and immediately noticed the Civic's front right tire was low. Not flat, but definitely needing air. It was perfect, almost too perfect, like the universe was giving her an excuse. The garage had 2 bays, both currently occupied, one with a Subaru up on a lift, another with an ancient pickup truck getting what looked like a transmission rebuild. The building itself was neat but worn, paint fading, the kind of place that had been there for decades and would be there for decades more through sheer stubbornness. A man emerged from the office, wiping his hands on a rag. He was in his 60s, barrel-chested, with white hair and shrewd eyes. The name Henderson was stitched on his coveralls. "Help you?" he asked, friendly but efficient. "I think I need air in my tire," Charlotte said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Maybe someone could take a look? I'm not sure if it's a slow leak or just temperature change." "Sure thing. Pull her around to Bay 3. He gestured to the 3rd garage door, currently closed. "I'll get someone on it." Charlotte pulled the Civic around, parked where directed, and climbed out to find Henderson already opening the bay door. The space beyond was organized chaos. Tools hanging on pegboards, parts stacked on metal shelving, the kind of accumulation that came from years of making do and fixing things. And there, emerging from the back office, with a work order in hand, was Eli Turner. He looked exactly like his photos, and completely different in person. The camera had captured his features, but not the way he moved, all easy competence and contained strength. He was in work coveralls, hair pushed back from his face, a smudge of grease on his jaw. When he looked up and saw her, his expression was polite, professional, with no flicker of recognition. Why would there be? She'd been dying when he'd seen her, covered in blood, barely conscious. This woman standing in his garage, clean, healthy, upright, bore no resemblance to that broken thing in the wreck. "Henderson says you need a tire checked?" Eli's voice was exactly as she remembered, steady, warm, the kind of voice that made you believe things would be okay. "Yeah, front right, not sure what's going on with it." Charlotte stepped back, gave him room to work, and watched as he crouched beside the tire with the unselfconscious grace of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. "Probably just needs air," he said, running his hand over the tread. "But I'll check for nails, make sure you're not dealing with a puncture." He glanced up at her, smiled. Where you headed? Just passing through. I'm Lena. She held out her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, he took it. His hand was warm, calloused, exactly as she remembered. The touch lasted maybe 3 seconds, but Charlotte felt it everywhere, a connection that made no sense and perfect sense all at once. Eli, he said, welcome to Millbrook. Population way too small, where everybody knows everybody, and you just became the most interesting thing that happened all week. She laughed despite her nerves. That's a low bar. You'd be surprised. Last week's excitement was Mrs. Patterson's cat getting stuck in her attic. We're easy to entertain. He stood, grabbed an air pressure gauge from his toolbox. This'll just take a minute. You want coffee? Henderson keeps a pot in the office. Fair warning, it tastes like motor oil. Because it's secretly motor oil? Nobody's proven anything in court yet. He was smiling again, and Charlotte felt something in her chest loosen. This was good. This was normal. Just two people having an ordinary conversation in an ordinary garage on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. Except nothing about it felt ordinary at all. Charlotte accepted the coffee, which did indeed taste vaguely of motor oil and regret, but she drank it anyway because refusing would have been stranger than choking it down. She stood in Henderson's cramped office, watching through the window as Eli worked on her tire with methodical efficiency, and tried to reconcile the man she'd built up in her head with the one crouched beside her Honda. In her imagination, he'd been larger somehow, mythical, the kind of hero who existed in stories but not in real life. But watching him now, she realized the truth was better than mythology. He was just a man doing his job, checking tire pressure and running his hands over tread patterns, and somehow that made what he'd done even more remarkable. He hadn't saved her because he was extraordinary. He'd saved her because when the moment came, he'd chosen to be decent. That's Eli Turner, Henderson said from behind his desk, where he was reconciling what looked like a month's worth of receipts with a calculator that probably predated her birth. Good man. Best mechanic I've ever employed, and I've been running this place for 40 years. Charlotte turned, careful to keep her expression casually interested rather than desperate for information. He seems nice. Nice don't cover it. His wife died a couple years back, cancer, left him with the boy to raise alone. Most men would have fallen apart or gotten bitter, but Eli just kept going. Works hard, coaches Noah's baseball team, volunteers at the church pancake breakfast every third Sunday. Henderson looked up from his calculator, his eyes shrewd. You single? The question caught her off guard. Yes, recently divorced. Good. Eli needs someone. Won't admit it, stubborn as a mule about these things. But that boy needs a mother. And Eli needs someone to come home to besides an 8-year-old who thinks mac and cheese is a food group. He went back to his receipts. Just saying, you seem like good people. Charlotte didn't know whether to laugh or cry at the absurdity. Henderson was trying to set her up with Eli while she stood there lying about her name, her life, everything except the fact that she was single. Though even that was complicated by the fact that she'd never actually been married, much less divorced. I'm just passing through, she said, the words feeling heavier than they should. That's what they all say. Then they meet someone, or they like the quiet, or they get a flat tire that needs more than air. Henderson smiled without looking up. Millbrook's got a way of keeping people. You'll see. Before Charlotte could respond, Eli appeared in the doorway, work order in hand. Good news and weird news. Good news is it's not a leak, just low pressure from the cold. Filled it up, checked the others, you're good to go. Weird news is your rear brake pads are getting thin. Not dangerous yet, but you'll want them replaced in the next month or so. How much would that cost? Charlotte asked, playing the part of someone who had to think about car repairs. Parts and labor, probably $200. I can do it today if you want to wait, or you can bring it back whenever. He handed her the work order. No charge for the air and inspection. She looked at the paper, at his handwriting that was surprisingly neat for a mechanic. That's generous. It's air in 5 minutes, not exactly breaking the bank. He was smiling again, and Charlotte felt that strange pull in her chest, the one that had nothing to do with her injuries and everything to do with the way he looked at her like she was a person, not a portfolio. Can I buy you lunch? The words came out before she could stop them. To say thank you for the air and not charging me a fortune. Eli blinked, clearly surprised. You don't have to do that. I know, but I'm hungry, and eating alone in a strange town is depressing, and you look like you know where the good food is. She was improvising, but it felt natural, like slipping into a role she'd been rehearsing without knowing it. Unless you're busy, I don't want to impose. He glanced at Henderson, who waved him off. Go. It's slow today, and you've been here since 6. Take an hour. You sure? I'm sure. Go feed the tourist before she starves to death in our lobby. Eli laughed, shook his head, but Charlotte could see him capitulating. All right. But fair warning, the good food in Millbrook is relative. We've got Rosie's Diner, and that's pretty much it unless you count the gas station hot dogs. I'll risk it. They walked to Rosie's because it was only 2 blocks, and the November air was crisp but not yet brutal, the kind of cold that woke you up rather than shut you down. Eli kept his hands in his coverall pockets, and Charlotte matched his pace. Hyper-aware of the space between them and the way people they passed nodded hello to Eli, looked curiously at her. Small-town life, Eli said, catching her expression. Everyone knows everyone, and strangers are either threats or entertainment. You're definitely entertainment. Should I be worried? Only if you committed any crimes. We take law and order seriously here. Mrs. Patterson will give you the stink eye for jaywalking. Rosie's Diner was exactly what Charlotte expected. Red vinyl booze, black and white checkered floor, a counter with stools where old men nursed coffee and debated topics that probably hadn't changed in decades. The smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee hit her the moment they walked in, and her stomach reminded her she'd been too nervous to eat breakfast. A waitress who had to be Rosie herself, 60-something, dyed red hair, the kind of presence that commanded rooms, looked up from wiping down tables and broke into a huge smile. Eli Turner, as I live and breathe. You actually taking a lunch break? Should I mark this in the calendar? Henderson kicked me out, said I was making the place look busy. Eli guided Charlotte to a booth by the window. Rosie, this is Lena. She's passing through, and I promised her Millbrook's finest cuisine. Oh, honey, I'm sorry. But Rosie was laughing, already pulling out her order pad. What can I get you? And don't let Eli order the meatloaf. It's Thursday, which means it's been sitting since Tuesday. They ordered burgers for both of them, fries to share, coffee that came in mugs the size of soup bowls, and then they were alone in the booth with the awkwardness of 2 strangers trying to figure out how to be less strange. So, Eli said, wrapping his hands around his coffee mug. Ohio, you said. What brings you all the way out here? Charlotte had prepared for this, had rehearsed the lie until it felt almost true. Divorce. Needed to clear my head, so I'm just driving. No real destination, just wherever the road takes me. That's brave. Or crazy. Maybe both. Definitely both. She sipped her coffee, which was vastly better than Henderson's. What about you? Born and raised here. Unfortunately, I tried to escape once, went to trade school in Pittsburgh, thought I'd make it in the big city, lasted about 6 months before I realized I'm a small-town guy at heart. Came back, met my wife, had my son, and here I am. He said it lightly, but Charlotte caught the shadow that crossed his face when he mentioned his wife. Henderson mentioned you have a son. Noah, he's 8, thinks he knows everything, actually knows about half of everything, which is pretty impressive at 8. The shadow lifted, replaced by unmistakable pride. He's got this gift for drawing. Not just kid stuff, actual art. His teacher says she's never seen anything like it. You must be proud. Terrified, mostly. What do you do with a kid who has talent in a town where the biggest art venue is the library bulletin board? He shook his head. Sorry, I'm not usually this much of a downer. You asked about me and I gave you the greatest hits of single dad anxiety. Don't apologize. It's refreshing. And it was. In Charlotte's world, people performed their lives, curated their words, showed you only the polished version of themselves. Eli's honesty was like cold water, shocking and clarifying. Most people lie about how they're doing. What's the point? Life's hard enough without pretending it's not. Their food arrived, and they ate while talking, the conversation flowing easier than Charlotte expected. She told him about her fake divorce, inventing a husband who'd been emotionally distant and a marriage that had died of neglect rather than malice. He told her about Sarah, about the cancer that had taken her too fast, and the medical bills that had taken everything else. about learning to braid Noah's hair and make school lunches and be both parents at once. Some days I'm barely treading water, he admitted, stealing a fry from the basket between them. But Noah's happy, he's healthy, and we've got a roof over our heads. That's more than a lot of people have. Charlotte thought about her penthouse, about the square footage she never used and the rooms she never entered, about having everything and feeling empty. You're a good father. I'm a trying father. There's a difference. He looked at her, really looked at her, and Charlotte felt exposed in a way she hadn't felt in years. What about you? Kids? No, never seemed like the right time, and then suddenly I was divorced and it was too late. It's never too late. You're what, 30? 34. Practically a teenager. You've got time. He was smiling, teasing gently, and Charlotte found herself smiling back despite the weight of her lies. They finished lunch, argued briefly over the check. Charlotte won by physically blocking Eli from reaching his wallet, and walked back to the garage through streets that were starting to feel less foreign. Millbrook was the kind of place that could grow on you if you let it, Charlotte thought. The kind of place where people still said hello to strangers and restaurants didn't lock their doors, and mechanics gave you free air and honest advice. The kind of place where a woman could disappear and become someone else entirely. So what's the verdict? Eli asked as they reached her car. You sticking around or moving on? Charlotte looked at him, at the garage behind him, at the town stretching out in all directions with its modest dreams and honest struggles. She thought about Marcus waiting in Pittsburgh for her call, about board meetings and quarterly reports, and the empire she'd built that suddenly felt very far away. I might stick around for a day or two, she heard herself say. See if Millbrook lives up to the hype. What hype? I don't think anyone's hyped Millbrook since 1987 when we got the Pizza Hut. The one that closed? The one that closed. He pulled a business card from his pocket, wrote something on the back. Henderson's, my cell, in case your tire acts up or you need recommendations for entertainment. What kind of entertainment does Millbrook offer? There's the library, the park, if you like watching geese, the Rusty Nail if you like watching divorced men cry into their beer. We're very diverse. Charlotte took the card, tucked it into her pocket where it rested next to her real driver's license, her credit cards with her real name, all the evidence of who she actually was. I'll keep my expectations low. Smart woman. He started back toward the garage, then paused. Hey, Lena. Yeah? Thanks for lunch. It was nice, normal. I don't get a lot of normal these days. She understood exactly what he meant. Me neither. Charlotte found a motel on the edge of town, the kind of place that charged by the week and asked no questions. The room was clean but Spartan. Double bed with a floral comforter, TV bolted to the dresser, bathroom that smelled of industrial cleaner. It was nothing like her penthouse, and she loved it immediately. She called Marcus, who answered on the first ring. Tell me you haven't been arrested. Why would I be arrested? Because you're running a con on a man who saved your life, and karma has a sense of humor. Papers rustled on his end. How'd it go? I bought him lunch. We talked. He has no idea who I am. Charlotte kicked off her shoes, lay back on the bed that was harder than any bed she'd slept in since college. Marcus, he's exactly as good as I remembered. Better, even. He's kind and honest, and he actually cares about things that matter. And you're lying to him about everything. I know. So what's the plan? You going to keep pretending until he figures it out, or until you get bored? The question stung because it was fair. I don't know. I just need time. Time to understand who he is without the complication of who I am. Marcus sighed, the sound of a man who'd given up on talking sense into the senseless. How long? A few days, a week at most. I'll come back before the board meeting, I promise. The board meeting is in 10 days, Charlotte. You're the CEO. You can't just disappear. Watch me. She said it lightly, but they both knew she meant it. Tell them I'm recovering. Tell them I'm working remotely. Tell them whatever you want. I trust you. Your trust is going to get me fired when this blows up in your face. Then I'll hire you back at double your salary. You already pay me too much. Impossible. You're worth every penny. She softened her voice. I'll be careful. I promise. After they hung up, Charlotte lay in the motel room listening to the sounds of Millbrook, At dusk, cars passing on the main road, someone's dog barking, the distant laugh of children playing. She thought about Eli's face when he talked about Noah, about the way his hands moved with such certainty when he worked, about the easy kindness that seemed baked into his bones. She thought about the lies she was living and the truth she was chasing and wondered which one would destroy her first. The next morning, Charlotte, Lena, went back to the garage. She told herself it was because her brake pads really did need replacing, but the truth was simpler and more complicated. She wanted to see him again. She wanted more of the easy conversation, the honest laughter, the feeling of being seen as a person rather than a balance sheet. Eli was under a Chevy Suburban when she arrived, only his legs visible, the rest of him swallowed by the undercarriage. Henderson waved her over. "He'll be out in a minute. Something about a transmission mount? Coffee? Is it the motor oil blend? Today's batch has subtle notes of diesel and regret." Perfect. She was halfway through the terrible coffee when Eli emerged, wiping his hands on a rag that was already so stained it seemed pointless. He looked surprised to see her, then pleased, and Charlotte felt something warm settle in her chest. "Back already? Did the tire give up?" "No, but I've been thinking about the brake pads. If I'm going to be driving cross-country, I should probably address them sooner rather than later." "Smart. You want me to do it now?" "If you have time." "For you, I'll make time." He said it casually, but something in his tone made Charlotte's pulse quicken. "Fair warning, though, it'll take a couple hours. You'll be stuck in Millbrook for a while." "I can think of worse fates." She watched him work, sitting on a bench in the garage with Henderson's terrible coffee and a borrowed magazine about antique cars. Eli moved with the same methodical grace she'd noticed yesterday, every action economical and precise. He explained what he was doing as he went, not because she asked, but because he seemed to genuinely want her to understand how her car worked. "Most people just want to know the price," he said, showing her the worn brake pad. "They don't care about the how or why. But understanding your car is like understanding your body. If you know how it works, you know when something's wrong before it becomes a crisis." "Is that your sales pitch?" "That's my philosophy. Henderson says I'm terrible at upselling because I actually fix what needs fixing instead of inventing problems." "Sounds like Henderson's lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have him. Not many places would hire a guy with a kid who needs to leave early for baseball games and school plays and doctor appointments." Eli torqued down a bolt, checked his work. "Single parents don't have a lot of professional flexibility." "Your wife would be proud," Charlotte said quietly, "of how you're raising Noah." Eli paused, his hand stilling on the wrench. "I hope so. Some days I'm not sure I'm doing any of it right. But Noah's a good kid, so maybe I'm not completely screwing it up." "From what I can tell, you're doing more than just not screwing it up. You're actually succeeding." He looked at her, and for a moment the garage fell away, the noise and grease and mechanical chaos fading until it was just the two of them in a pocket of quiet understanding. "You're easy to talk to," he said finally. "Most people, they hear widow and single dad, and they either pity me or they run. You just listen." "Maybe I've got some practice being pitied myself. Divorced at 34, driving around the country without a plan. Not exactly winning at life." "I think you're winning just fine." He went back to work, but Charlotte caught his smile. "At least you know how to take care of your brake pads." The work took 2.5 hours, and when Eli was done, he presented her with the work order and an invoice that was suspiciously lower than the estimate he'd given her yesterday. "Did you give me a discount?" she asked, studying the numbers. "I gave you the friend rate. That's different. We just met yesterday. And you bought me lunch and didn't make it weird when I talked about my dead wife. That's friend behavior in my book." He shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "Plus, Henderson gave me grief about charging you full price. Said I'd never get a date if I gouged pretty tourists." Charlotte felt her cheeks heat. "Henderson needs to mind his business." "Henderson has no business to mind. That's why he minds everyone else's." Eli walked her to her car, which now sat in the lot gleaming slightly more than when she'd dropped it off. "So what's the plan? Sticking around or hitting the road?" She should leave. Every instinct honed by years of business told her this was getting complicated, that the longer she stayed, the harder it would be to untangle truth from fiction. But looking at Eli in the afternoon sunlight, At the way he watched her with genuine interest and no agenda, Charlotte found she didn't want to leave. "I saw a flyer at the diner," she said, improvising. "Something about a fall festival this weekend?" "Oh, that. Yeah, it's basically an excuse to drink apple cider and pretend we're celebrating harvest season instead of just killing time until winter." He hesitated. "It's pretty low-key. Local vendors, some craft booze, usually a terrible band playing in the park. But Noah loves it, and they have this thing where kids can paint pumpkins. Sounds fun. You should come, if you're still around." He said it casually, but Charlotte caught the hope underneath. "I mean, you don't have to. But if you wanted to see Millbrook at its most aggressively wholesome, that would be it." "What time?" "Starts at noon on Saturday, but the good caramel corn runs out by 1, so if you want to experience true disappointment, you should probably arrive early." Charlotte laughed, felt something in her chest crack open just a little more. "I'll be there, with low expectations and a high tolerance for wholesome." "Perfect. It's a date. I mean, not a date, just a—" Eli stopped, ran his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustrated embarrassment. "Henderson was right. I really am terrible at this." "At what?" "Talking to pretty women without sounding like an idiot." Charlotte felt her breath catch. "You're doing fine." "Yeah?" "Yeah." They stood there in the parking lot, the afternoon stretching long shadows across pavement, and Charlotte thought about all the ways this could go wrong, all the lies she was telling and the truths she was hiding. But standing there with Eli looking at her like she was someone worth looking at, she couldn't bring herself to care about consequences. Saturday arrived cold and clear, the kind of November day that felt like nature's last gift before winter settled in for real. Charlotte woke early in her motel room, spent too long deciding what to wear, settled on jeans and a burgundy sweater that was nice without being too nice, and arrived at the festival 15 minutes early because being late felt wrong in a way she couldn't articulate. The park had been transformed into exactly the kind of wholesome community gathering Eli had promised. White tents selling everything from homemade jam to knitted scarves, kids running between booths with painted faces and sticky hands, the smell of funnel cakes and cider mixing with wood smoke from someone's portable fire pit. A band was already playing on a small stage. Middle-aged men with acoustic guitars mangling a Creedence Clearwater Revival song with more enthusiasm than skill. Charlotte bought a cup of cider and wandered, taking in the scene with the fascination of an anthropologist. This was life as lived by normal people, she thought, community and craft booths and terrible live music. No galas or gallery openings or networking events where every conversation was a transaction. Just people existing together without agenda. "You came." She turned to find Eli approaching, Noah at his side. The boy was small for 8, all sharp angles and curious eyes, wearing a jacket that had clearly been purchased with growth in mind. He looked at Charlotte with the frank assessment that only children can pull off without being rude. "Are you my dad's girlfriend?" he asked immediately. "Noah?" Eli's voice carried a warning, but he was fighting a smile. "We talked about this, boundaries. You said she was pretty, and you've been weird all morning. You only get weird when you like someone." Noah turned back to Charlotte, utterly unrepentant. "He made me help him pick out his shirt. He never cares about shirts." "I care about shirts," Eli protested weakly. "You wore the same shirt for a week once. Mom had to steal it while you were sleeping to wash it." Charlotte laughed, charmed despite herself. "I'm Lena, and I'm your dad's friend, not his girlfriend. We just met. That's what my friend Tyler's mom said about her boyfriend, and now they're getting married." Noah said it matter-of-factly, like he was citing established precedent. "Adults are weird about words." "We really are," Charlotte agreed. She crouched down to Noah's eye level. "Your dad tells me you're an artist." The boy's face transformed, suspicion replaced by eager enthusiasm. "I draw, mostly people and buildings, sometimes animals, but they're hard. Did you know that horses have weird legs? Like, really weird. The joints are all backwards." "I did not know that." "It's true. I tried to draw a horse once, and it looked like a deer having a crisis." He pulled a small sketchbook from his jacket pocket, flipped it open to show her. "See? Crisis deer." The drawing was actually quite good. The proportions were off, but the line work showed genuine understanding of form and shadow. Charlotte studied it, impressed despite her extensive art expertise. This is really good, Noah. Have you had lessons? Nah, just YouTube and library books. Dad says lessons cost money we don't have right now. He said it without bitterness, just stating fact. But that's okay. I can learn by myself. Charlotte looked up at Eli, who was watching his son with barely concealed pride and equally obvious guilt. She recognized that expression, the look of a parent who wanted to give their child everything and couldn't, who measured their worth in what they couldn't provide rather than what they did. YouTube's pretty good, she said to Noah, but you know what might help? If you studied other artists, not just techniques, but the way they see the world. There's a painter named Rothko. He does these huge color field paintings. They look simple, but there's so much depth if you really look. Like what? Like emotion translated into color. Like maybe red isn't just red, but anger or love or the way sunset feels when you're thinking about someone you miss. Noah considered this with the seriousness of a Supreme Court justice weighing constitutional law. That's cool. Can I see them? They're in museums mostly, big cities. Charlotte caught herself before she could offer to take him, remembered who she was supposed to be. But there are books. I could help you find some at the library if you want. That would be awesome. Noah looked at his father. Dad, can we go to the library with Lena? If Lena wants to spend her Saturday helping an 8-year-old find art books instead of enjoying the festival, sure. Actually, Charlotte said, standing up and dusting off her jeans, that sounds like exactly how I'd like to spend my Saturday. But maybe after the pumpkin painting, I was promised disappointment over caramel corn. They spent the next 3 hours wandering through the festival, and Charlotte couldn't remember the last time she'd had this much uncomplicated fun. They painted pumpkins. Noah's was an elaborate dragon that he somehow pulled off. Eli's was a lopsided smiley face. Charlotte's was an attempt at geometric patterns that ended up looking like a migraine, and ate too much fried food and watched the terrible band with genuine appreciation for their terrible enthusiasm. Eli bought Noah a candy apple and let him eat it despite it being almost dinner time, and when the boy got sticky sugar all over his face, Eli cleaned him up with a napkin and spit in a gesture so casually parental that Charlotte felt her heart twist. This was what she'd been missing, she realized. Not just romance or companionship, but the messy reality of caring for another person. The sticky fingers and terrible music and pumpkins that didn't turn out right. The lived-in, worn-in comfort of family. You're thinking something serious, Eli said. They were walking slightly behind Noah, who'd run ahead to examine a booth selling wooden toys. I can see it on your face. Just thinking about how nice this is. Simple, real. That's Millbrook's brand. Aggressively real. He bumped her shoulder with his. You okay? Yeah, I'm good. Really good, actually. They ended up at the library as promised, the small brick building that anchored one end of Main Street. The librarian, a woman in her 70s named Mrs. Chen, who'd apparently known Eli since he was Noah's age, helped them find art books, cooing over Noah's interest and shooting knowing looks at Charlotte that she pretended not to notice. Noah settled at one of the reading tables, completely absorbed in a book about the Impressionists, and Eli guided Charlotte to the small cafe area where they could watch him without hovering. Thank you, Eli said quietly, for being kind to him. People usually are, but you're different. You actually listen to him, treat him like he's interesting instead of just cute. He is interesting, smart, talented, funny. You're raising a good human. I'm trying. Some days I feel like I'm failing spectacularly, but then he does something like this, gets completely lost in art he loves. And I think maybe I'm not destroying him after all. Eli looked at her, his expression open in a way that made Charlotte's chest ache. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why Millbrook? Of all the towns you could have driven through, all the places you could have stopped, why here? The question should have been simple, but weighted with all her lies, it became impossible. Charlotte looked at Noah across the library, at his small form bent over the art book, at the way the afternoon light caught his dark hair, and thought about the truth she couldn't tell. Because your father saved my life, and I needed to understand why. Sometimes you just end up where you're supposed to be, she said finally, even if you don't know why. Eli seemed to accept this, or maybe he just chose not to push. Well, I'm glad you ended up here. Noah likes you. I like you. Henderson likes you enough to stop overcharging for oil changes, which is his version of a marriage proposal. Should I be worried? Very. Henderson's been single for 20 years and he's getting desperate. They laughed, and something shifted in the air between them, something charged and uncertain and full of possibility. Charlotte felt it, knew Eli felt it too by the way his smile faded into something more serious, more searching. Lena, he started, then stopped. Never mind. It's stupid. What? I was going to ask if you wanted to have dinner sometime, like actual dinner. Not festival food or lunch at Rosie's, but dinner where we sit down and talk, and maybe it could be... He stopped again, looking frustrated with himself. See? Told you. Stupid. It's not stupid. Charlotte's heart was hammering. I'd like that. Yeah? Yeah. His smile transformed his entire face, made him look younger and hopeful and terrified all at once. Okay, good. Tomorrow? There's this place in the next town over, nothing fancy, but they make this pot roast that's borderline religious. Tomorrow's perfect. They made plans, exchanged phone numbers, and Charlotte tried to ignore the voice in her head screaming that this was wrong, that she was building something on a foundation of lies, that when the truth came out, and it would come out, it always did, she would hurt this good man who'd already been hurt enough. But watching Eli's face as he looked at his son, at the way he listened when she talked and laughed at her jokes and treated her like she mattered, Charlotte couldn't make herself stop. She wanted this. Wanted him. Wanted the messy, complicated, impossible reality of being seen as just Lena Shaw, slightly broken divorcee, passing through town, instead of Charlotte Pierce, billionaire CEO with an empire to maintain. She wanted to be nobody, just for a little while longer. The week that followed was the best and worst of Charlotte's life. Best because she and Eli fell into an easy rhythm. Dinners at the pot roast place, coffee at Rosie's, afternoon walks where they talked about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up in Millbrook, about learning to fix cars from his father, about the day Noah was born, and how he'd cried holding something so small and perfect and terrifying. She told him her carefully constructed lies, adding details that made Lena Shaw more real. The graphic design career, the ex-husband who'd wanted kids she wasn't ready for, the cross-country drive that was supposed to help her figure out what came next. She was good at lying. She'd been doing it her whole life in smaller ways, corporate smiles that meant nothing, strategic interest in boring men's hobbies, enthusiasm for deals that made her feel empty. But lying to Eli was different. Every fiction felt like theft, taking his honesty and giving back counterfeit currency. Tell me something true, he said one evening. They were in his living room, Noah asleep upstairs, the house quiet except for the old furnace's rhythmic wheeze. Something you've never told anyone. Charlotte's mind raced through all the truths she couldn't share, landing finally on one that was safe. I'm afraid I'll die without ever feeling like I've lived, like I'll get to the end and realize I spent my whole life chasing things that don't actually matter. Eli was quiet for a long moment, his hand warm where it held hers. I think about that sometimes too. After Sarah died, I realized how much time I'd wasted being angry about things that didn't matter. Bills, traffic, stupid arguments about whose turn it was to take out the trash. And then suddenly, there was no more time, and all I wanted was one more stupid argument about trash. Do you still love her? Yeah. But it's different now, less sharp, more like... He paused, searching for words. Like she's part of me instead of separate. Like I carry her with me wherever I go, but I'm not waiting for her to come back. Does that make sense? It makes perfect sense. He looked at her, his eyes reflecting lamplight. I like you, Lena. A lot. And that feels both good and terrifying because I don't know what I'm doing. I haven't done this since I was 22, and back then I at least had the excuse of youth for being an idiot. Charlotte's chest felt too small for everything she was feeling. I like you too, and I'm terrified too. But maybe that's okay. Maybe being scared means it matters. Maybe. He leaned closer, and Charlotte knew he was going to kiss her, wanted him to kiss her despite knowing it would complicate everything beyond repair. His lips were just inches from hers when, Dad? Noah's voice floated down the stairs, sleep rough and querulous. I had a bad dream. Eli pulled back, his expression cycling through disappointment, parental duty, and wry humor. Hold that thought. I'll be right back. He went upstairs, and Charlotte heard the murmur of his voice soothing Noah, the creak of bed springs as he sat on his son's bed. She looked around the living room, modest furniture, worn but clean, Noah's drawings tacked to the walls alongside family photos that included a woman with Sarah's smile. This was Eli's life, real, grounded, built on love and loss and the daily work of showing up, and she was infiltrating it with lies. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, checking in like he'd been doing every day. Board meetings in 3 days. You coming back? Charlotte looked toward the stairs, toward the sound of Eli's voice reading a bedtime story to chase away nightmares. I don't know. Charlotte, I know it's crazy, but I'm happy here, Marcus. Actually happy. When's the last time you heard me say that? You're happy because you're living a lie. That's not the same as actual happiness. Maybe it is. Maybe that's the only kind of happiness I get to have. Or maybe you could tell him the truth. Stop this before someone gets hurt. Someone's already going to get hurt. The question is whether I get to be happy first. She hung up before Marcus could argue, before she had to admit he was right. Eli came back downstairs, settled beside her with a sigh. Sorry about that. Nightmares have been a thing lately. I think the anniversary of Sarah's death is coming up, and kids pick up on stuff even when you try to hide it. When's the anniversary? Next week? 2 years. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture Charlotte had learned meant he was stressed. I don't know what to do. Noah barely talks about her anymore, and I don't know if that's healthy or concerning or just normal grief. Maybe it's all three. Maybe there's no right way to grieve. Charlotte took his hand, laced their fingers together. But he's got you. That's what matters. I hope it's enough. Eli looked at their joined hands, then back at her face. Can I try something? What? Instead of answering, he leaned in again, and this time there was no interruption. His lips met hers softly, questioningly, and Charlotte kissed him back with all the desperate honesty she couldn't voice. The kiss was gentle at first, then deeper, carrying weeks of attraction and loneliness and the aching need to be known. When they pulled apart, Eli's smile was devastating. I've been wanting to do that since the day you bought me lunch. Why didn't you? Because I'm an idiot who overthinks everything. He kissed her again, briefer. But I'm working on it. They sat together in the quiet house, Charlotte's head on his shoulder, and she let herself pretend this was real, that she was Lena Shaw, that they had met by chance, that there were no lies hanging between them like unexploded ordnance. But reality was coming. She could feel it approaching like a storm on the horizon, inevitable and destructive. Because the thing about building something on lies was that eventually the foundation cracked, and when it did, everything came crashing down. The crash came 3 days later on a Tuesday morning that started ordinary and ended in ruins. Charlotte was at Rosie's having breakfast when the magazine arrived. Someone had left it on the counter, one of those glossy business publications that profiled CEOs and covered market trends. She'd been in dozens of them over the years, had learned to smile for the camera and give quotable sound bites about innovation and disruption. She didn't notice it until Rosie picked it up, studied the cover, then looked at Charlotte with dawning recognition. Well, I'll be damned, Rosie said slowly. Charlotte Pierce, the billionaire. The words dropped into the diner like a grenade. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. Charlotte felt the weight of a dozen stares, felt her careful disguise crack and shatter. I can explain, she said. But Rosie was already waving over another customer, showing them the magazine, the photo on the cover of Charlotte at some gala, dripping in diamonds and designer clothes, looking nothing like the woman in jeans and a simple sweater who'd been eating pancakes 5 minutes ago. The news spread through Millbrook faster than any technology could have managed. Small-town gossip was its own form of social media, instant and merciless. By the time Charlotte made it to Henderson's garage, Eli already knew. He was standing in the parking lot, arms crossed, his expression carefully blank in a way that was somehow worse than anger. Eli, please, let me explain. You're Charlotte Pierce. It wasn't a question. The woman from the accident, the one I pulled from the wreck. Yes. And you've been lying to me for 3 weeks about your name, your life, everything. Not everything. Everything I told you about how I feel, about what I want, that was real. How would I know? His voice was quiet, dangerous. How would I know what's real when you've been lying since the moment we met? Was any of it true? Or was this just some rich person's game slumming with the poor mechanic for kicks? No, God, no. Eli, I came here because I needed to thank you, and then I met you and you were so good, and I just wanted... She stopped, searching for words that could possibly make this right. I wanted to be seen as a person, not a portfolio, just for a little while. I wanted to be nobody. So you used me. You used my son. I never used Noah. I would never. You let him get attached to you. You let me get attached to you. And for what? So you could feel good about yourself? So you could have some story to tell at parties about the time you pretended to be poor? It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, Charlotte? Her real name in his mouth sounded like an accusation. Tell me. Make me understand why you thought lying to me for weeks was acceptable. Charlotte felt tears on her face, didn't bother wiping them away. Because you saw me. When I was dying in that car, you saw me and you stayed. And I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who only see my money, who only want what I can give them. But you didn't know who I was. And you still stayed. And I needed to know if that was real. If you were real. I am real. You're the one who's fake. The words landed like a physical blow. Charlotte stepped back, wrapped her arms around herself. You're right. I'm fake. I've been fake for so long, I don't know how to be anything else. But what I felt with you, what we had, that was real. That was the most real I've been in years. You don't get to decide what was real. You lied. That's it. That's all this is. Eli turned away, started walking back toward the garage. Go back to your penthouse and your billions, Charlotte. We're done here. Eli, please. We're done. He didn't look back. Don't come to my house. Don't call me. Don't try to fix this with money, or lawyers, or whatever rich people do when they break things. Just leave. Charlotte stood in the parking lot and watched him disappear into the garage, watched the door close behind him with a finality that echoed in her bones. Around her, Millbrook bustled with its usual activity, people going about their days, but she felt utterly alone, more isolated than she'd ever felt in the glass towers of her corporate empire. She'd come to Millbrook looking for the man who'd saved her life. Instead, she'd destroyed his, and in the process she'd destroyed the only thing that had made her feel human in years. The pencil was still in her pocket, a stupid yellow reminder of the day everything changed. Charlotte pulled it out, looked at it through her tears, and wondered if it was possible to save someone's life and ruin it all at once. She'd found her answer, and it was breaking her heart. Charlotte drove back to Pittsburgh in silence, the Honda's engine humming beneath her while her mind replayed the look on Eli's face on an endless loop. Not anger. She could have handled anger. It was the disappointment that gutted her, the way he'd looked at her like she was something broken beyond repair. Marcus was waiting in her penthouse when she arrived, arms crossed, wearing his "I told you so" expression without needing to say the actual words. Don't, Charlotte said, dropping her keys on the marble counter. The sound echoed through the empty space, too loud in the silence. Whatever you're going to say, just don't. I was just going to ask if you wanted tea. I want something stronger than tea. At 2 in the afternoon? It's 5 o'clock somewhere, and I just destroyed the life of the man who saved mine. I think I've earned a drink. She collapsed onto the couch that cost more than Eli's entire house, still wearing Lena Shaw's clothes, and wondered when she'd become someone she didn't recognize. He told me to leave, to go back to my billions and leave him alone. Marcus moved to the bar, poured 2 glasses of scotch that cost more per bottle than Eli made in a month. He handed her one and sat in the chair across from her, the same configuration they'd used for thousands of business meetings, except this time Charlotte was the problem that needed solving. What did you expect? He asked, not unkindly. You lied to him for weeks, built a relationship on fiction. He has every right to be angry. I know. The scotch burned going down, sharp and clarifying. I know I screwed up, but Marcus, when I was with him, I felt like a person. Not a CEO, not an heiress, just a woman having breakfast and painting pumpkins and talking about art with an 8-year-old. Do you know how long it's been since I felt human? So you used him to feel better about yourself. It wasn't like that. But even as she said it, Charlotte wondered if it was exactly like that. Had she been using Eli as some kind of emotional rehabilitation, a way to remember what it felt like to be seen for who she was rather than what she had? I cared about him. I still care about him. Then tell him the truth, all of it. Why you came, why you stayed, what it meant to you. He doesn't want to hear from me. He made that very clear. Then give him time and space. Let him process. Marcus sipped his scotch, studied her with the same analytical gaze he used on quarterly reports. You're Charlotte Pierce. You've negotiated hostile takeovers and survived boardroom coups. A small-town mechanic's hurt feelings shouldn't be beyond your capabilities to handle. This isn't business, Marcus. I can't just throw money at it until it goes away. No, but you can be patient, strategic. Figure out what you actually want, and then pursue it with the same intensity you use for everything else. What if what I want is impossible? You built a billion-dollar empire from a small gallery your father left you. You turned a regional operation into a global conglomerate. Nothing's impossible for you when you actually try. Charlotte looked at him, at her friend and assistant, and the person who knew her better than anyone, and felt something shift in her chest. Marcus was right. She'd spent 3 weeks being passive, letting things happen to her, pretending to be someone else. It was time to be Charlotte Pierce again. Not the cold CEO, but the woman who fought for what she wanted and didn't accept defeat. I need to fix this, she said. Good. How? I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. The board meeting was a disaster. Charlotte showed up late, still distracted, and spent 2 hours fielding questions about quarterly performance while her mind was 3 hours away in a small town she'd probably never see again. The board members noticed her distraction, exchanged looks that promised future problems, but she couldn't bring herself to care. After the meeting, James cornered her in the hallway outside the conference room. What's going on with you, Bet? He asked, his concern manifesting as irritation the way it always did. You were completely checked out in there. Henderson from Acquisitions asked you 3 times about the Tokyo deal, and you just stared at him. I'm fine. You're not fine, you haven't been fine since the accident. He lowered his voice, glanced around to make sure they were alone. Charlotte, talk to me. What happened in Millbrook? She almost told him everything, the lies, the connection, the spectacular way it had all fallen apart. But James wouldn't understand. He'd never done anything reckless or messy in his life. He'd married the right woman, invested wisely, lived carefully. He was good at being good. Charlotte had never been good at being good. Nothing happened, she said. I went, I thanked the man who saved me, I came back. That's it. Then why do you look like someone died? Because someone did. The version of me that thought she could be normal for 5 minutes. James's expression softened, and he pulled her into a hug that she didn't know she needed until she was already clinging to him. You've never been normal, Charlotte. That's not an insult. You're extraordinary. Sometimes I think you forget that. Sometimes I wish I could be ordinary. No, you don't. You'd be bored in a week. He was probably right. Charlotte pulled back, straightened her suit, rebuilt the armor she'd let slip. I'm fine. Really. Just tired. The recovery's taking longer than I expected. Take time. The company will survive without you micromanaging for a few weeks. But Charlotte knew better. The moment she stopped being indispensable was the moment people started questioning why she was in charge. That was the trap of power. You could never show weakness, never admit uncertainty, never be anything less than perfect. She went back to work with renewed focus, throwing herself into acquisitions and strategy sessions and all the things that used to make her feel powerful. But at night, alone in her penthouse, she thought about Eli, about Noah, about the life she'd glimpsed and then destroyed. 2 weeks after she left Millbrook, a package arrived at her office. No return address, just her name and company address in careful handwriting she didn't recognize. Marcus brought it to her office personally, set it on her desk with a raised eyebrow. Secret admirer? More likely a bomb. But Charlotte was already opening it, careful with the brown paper wrapping that looked hand-done, personal, in a way that packages rarely were. Inside was a drawing. Noah's work. She recognized his style immediately. It showed three figures under a tree, a man, a woman, and a small boy, all rendered in careful detail with shading that suggested he'd been practicing. At the bottom, in a child's handwriting, "We miss you. Come back." Charlotte stared at the drawing until her vision blurred, then looked up at Marcus. How did he even know where to send this? "You're one of the most famous CEOs in the country. Your office address isn't exactly classified. Eli told me to leave them alone." "Eli's not 8 years old and heartbroken." Marcus gestured at the drawing. "That's a kid who got attached and doesn't understand why the nice lady disappeared. What are you going to do about it?" Charlotte studied the drawing again. At the careful way Noah had captured her face, made her look softer than she'd ever seen herself in mirrors or photographs. He'd drawn her smiling, happy, belonging in a way she'd never belonged anywhere. "I'm going to fix this," she said again, but this time she had a plan. The first step was research. Charlotte had built her empire on understanding what people wanted and giving it to them, and Eli was no different. She spent days combing through public records, talking to people who knew him, building a profile of not just who he was, but what he needed. What she found broke her heart in new ways. The medical bills from Sarah's cancer hadn't just decimated their savings. They'd left Eli with debt he'd been chipping away at for 2 years. He'd refinanced his house, taken every side job he could find, worked 60-hour weeks while raising Noah alone. The Mustang he'd mentioned, his father's car he was restoring, he'd sold half the parts to pay for Sarah's final months in hospice. He was drowning, had been drowning for years, and he'd never said a word. Not to Charlotte, not apparently to anyone. He just kept his head down and kept fighting, because that's what good men did. "You could pay off his debts," Marcus suggested when she showed him what she'd found. "Anonymous donation. Solve his problems without involving yourself." "No." Charlotte was already shaking her head. "That's exactly what he'd hate. That's me using money instead of actually fixing things." "So what's your alternative?" "I don't know yet, but it has to be right. It has to be something that helps without insulting him, that gives him options without making him feel bought." The answer came from an unlikely source, Noah's drawing. Charlotte had it framed and hung in her office, and one day her curator from the Paris office came in for a meeting, stopped dead when she saw it. "Where did you get this?" Margot asked, moving closer to study the piece. She was French, elegant, with an eye for talent that had made Charlotte's galleries millions. "This line work is extraordinary, untrained but intuitive." "Who's the artist?" "An 8-year-old in Pennsylvania." "An 8-year-old?" Margot looked at her like she'd suggested the Mona Lisa was painted by a hamster. "This is an 8-year-old's work?" "His name is Noah Turner. He's self-taught, uses YouTube and library books." Mon Dieu. With proper training, this child could be exceptional. Margot pulled out her phone, started taking photos of the drawing. "Charlotte, we should offer him a scholarship. The youth program at the Institute in Pittsburgh, it's perfect for students like this, gifted but lacking resources." "Would they take someone so young? For talent like this? We'd be fools not to." Margot was already texting, her fingers flying over the screen. "I'm contacting Maria at the Institute. She needs to see this. If this boy can draw like this at 8, imagine what he could do at 15, 20. We could be looking at the next great American artist." Charlotte felt something click into place, the first piece of a solution she was still building. The scholarship would cover everything: lessons, materials, exhibitions. Everything. We have donors specifically for cases like this, young artists from disadvantaged backgrounds who show promise. Margot looked up from her phone, her expression sharp. "Why do I feel like you have ulterior motives?" "Because you know me too well. This is about the man from Millbrook, the one you won't talk about, but who's making you miserable. His son deserves a chance. That's not ulterior, that's just true. And if offering his son a scholarship gets you back into the father's life, then that's a side benefit." Charlotte stood, moved to the window overlooking Pittsburgh. "I owe him everything, Margot. He saved my life. The least I can do is help his son achieve his potential." "The least you can do is tell him you love him." Charlotte turned, surprised. "I never said I loved him." "You didn't have to. I've known you for 15 years, Charlotte. I've never seen you like this. Not over any man, any deal, anything. Whatever happened in that town, it changed you. Margot picked up her bag, headed for the door. I'll arrange the scholarship, but you should know, trying to buy your way back into someone's life never works. Eventually, you have to just be honest. After she left, Charlotte stood at the window and thought about honesty. She'd built her life on strategic truths, on showing people what they wanted to see while hiding everything that made her vulnerable. But Eli had seen through all of it, had called her fake, and he'd been right. The question was whether Charlotte Pierce could learn to be real, or if she'd spent too many years performing to ever remember how to just be. The scholarship offer went out 3 days later, a formal letter from the Pittsburgh Institute of Fine Arts offering Noah Turner a full scholarship to their youth program. Classes every Saturday, all materials included, exhibition opportunities, mentorship from working artists. It was an opportunity most kids would kill for, and the letter made it clear that Noah had earned it on merit alone. Charlotte didn't sign it, didn't attach her name anywhere. She wanted this to be clean, to be about Noah's talent rather than her guilt. The response came a week later, not from Eli, but from Henderson's Auto Repairs business line. Charlotte listened to the voicemail 3 times, her heart hammering at the sound of Eli's voice, even filtered through tinny phone speakers. Ms. Pierce. I'm calling because Noah received a scholarship offer from the Pittsburgh Institute. The letter says it's based on merit, but the timing's suspicious, and I'm not an idiot. If you had anything to do with this, I need you to cancel it. I don't want your money. I don't want your guilt. I just want you to leave us alone like I asked. Charlotte felt the words like a physical blow, but underneath the rejection she heard something else. Fear. Eli was scared. Not of her, but of what accepting help might mean, of owing someone something, of having his choices taken away. She called back immediately, got voicemail, left her own message. Eli, it's Charlotte. And before you delete this, please just listen. The scholarship is real. It's not charity, it's not guilt, it's recognition of your son's extraordinary talent. My curator saw his drawing, the one he sent me, and she was blown away. That program takes maybe 10 kids a year from hundreds of applicants. Noah earned this. And if you don't believe me, call the Institute yourself. Ask them about their selection process. Ask them if they've ever accepted a scholarship student because someone asked them to as a favor. They'll tell you the same thing I'm telling you. Your son is gifted and he deserves a chance. She paused, tried to find words that wouldn't sound like manipulation. I know I lied to you, I know I hurt you, and I know sorry isn't enough. But this isn't about us. This is about Noah and his future. Don't let your anger at me rob him of an opportunity he's earned. Please. She hung up before she could say anything else, before she could beg or plead or do any of the desperate things that wouldn't change his mind anyway. 3 days of silence followed. Charlotte threw herself back into work, closed a deal in Singapore, fired an underperforming gallery director in Berlin, did all the things that used to make her feel powerful but now just made her feel hollow. On the 4th day, her office phone rang. The caller ID showed a Pittsburgh number. This is Charlotte Pierce. It's Eli. His voice was careful, guarded. I called the Institute. Talked to Maria Chen. She says Noah's drawing is the best work she's seen from someone his age in 20 years. Says the scholarship committee voted unanimously to accept him. I told you it was legitimate. You did. I didn't believe you. A pause. The sound of him breathing on the other end of the line. Why would you do this? After everything, why would you help him? Because he's talented. Because he deserves opportunities that Millbrook can't give him. Because... Charlotte stopped, then made herself say it. Because I care about him, and I care about you, and I'm sorry isn't enough, but I don't know what else to give you except the truth. The truth. That's rich coming from you. I know, but I'm trying. I'm trying to be honest now, even if I screwed up before. She took a breath, steadied herself. The scholarship is real. It has nothing to do with you and me. If you never want to see me again, that's fine. I'll respect that. But don't punish Noah because you're angry at me. The silence stretched so long Charlotte thought he'd hung up. Then, he wants to accept it. Noah, he's been talking about it non-stop for 3 days. Keeps asking if he can really go, really learn from real artists. Eli's voice cracked slightly. I want to give him this, but I don't want to owe you anything. You don't owe me anything. This is separate. This is just about giving a gifted kid the tools he needs to become who he's meant to be. Nothing's ever just about one thing with you, Charlotte. Everything's an angle, a play, a strategic move. You're right. That's who I've been for a long time. But being with you, being with Noah, that changed something. Made me remember that sometimes things can just be simple. Sometimes you can just do something because it's right. Another long pause. Then, Noah starts in January, every Saturday, 9 to 3. I'll drive him, pick him up, and we'll stay out of your way. The Institute's big enough that we don't have to see each other. Eli, that's the deal. He gets the scholarship, but you and I are done. Completely. I can't. He stopped, and Charlotte heard the pain underneath the anger. I can't trust you. Maybe that's my failing, but I can't. You made me believe in something that wasn't real, and I won't do that again. It was real. What I felt, what we had, that was real. How would I know? How would I ever know what's real with you? He hung up before she could answer, and Charlotte sat in her office with the phone still pressed to her ear, listening to dead air and wondering if this was what winning felt like, when you'd already lost everything that mattered. Marcus found her an hour later, still sitting in the same position, staring out at Pittsburgh's skyline without really seeing it. You okay? Noah's taking the scholarship. Eli wants nothing to do with me. So you got what you wanted. Half of what I wanted. Charlotte finally set down the phone, turned to face him. Is this it? Is this the best I get? Helping from a distance while the person I care about hates me? I don't think he hates you. I think he's hurt and scared and protecting himself. Marcus sat in the chair across from her desk, the same formation they'd used 100 times. You could fight for him. Show up at the Institute, force him to talk to you, wear him down until he forgives you. That would just prove him right, that I'm manipulative and strategic and everything he thinks I am. Or you could give him space, let him process. Maybe in time he'll realize that what you had was real, lies and all. And if he doesn't, then you gotta help an 8-year-old achieve his dreams, and you learn something about being honest. That's not nothing. Charlotte knew Marcus was right, but it still felt like losing. She'd spent her whole life winning, and she didn't know how to accept defeat gracefully, especially when what she was losing mattered more than any business deal ever had. The weeks crawled by. Charlotte tracked Noah's progress through Margot, who tracked it through Maria at the Institute. The boy was thriving. His teachers were amazed at his progress, his natural instinct for composition and color. He'd made friends with other young artists, was coming out of his shell in ways that delighted everyone who worked with him. He asks about you sometimes, Margot mentioned during one of their calls. Noah. He asks Maria if you're coming to see his work. What does she tell him? That you're very busy. He seems to accept that, but Maria says he always looks disappointed. Charlotte wanted to go, wanted to see Noah's work and watch him learn and be part of his growth. But she'd promised Eli space, and she was trying to be the kind of person who kept her promises, even when it hurt. Thanksgiving came and went. Charlotte spent it alone in her penthouse, turning down James's invitation to London because she couldn't face questions about why she looked so miserable. She worked through Christmas preparations, approved bonuses, attended parties where she smiled and made small talk and felt nothing. On December 15th, a package arrived at her office. This one had a return address, Eli's house in Millbrook. Charlotte stared at it for 10 minutes before she could make herself open it. Inside was a letter and a drawing. The drawing was Noah's, another family scene, but this one showed just 2 figures under the tree, Eli and Noah. The third space, where Charlotte had been in the first drawing, was empty, not crossed out, just empty, like a ghost or a question. The letter was from Eli, his handwriting neat and careful. Charlotte, Noah wanted me to send this. He says the drawing isn't finished, but he doesn't know how to finish it. I think he's waiting to see if you'll come back. I'm writing because I need to say something, and I'm better at writing than talking. You were right about the scholarship. Noah's thriving. Every Saturday when I pick him up, he's glowing, talking about perspective and composition and artists I've never heard of. His teacher says he's the most talented student she's had in 20 years. You gave him that. You saw his gift, and you made sure he had a chance to develop it. I was angry at you for lying. I still am, in some ways. But I've been thinking about why you did it, about what you said about wanting to be seen as a person instead of a portfolio. I get that now. Not because I forgive you, but because I understand it. Sarah used to say that people are complicated, that you can be mad at someone and grateful to them at the same time, that emotions don't have to make sense. She was right about a lot of things. The anniversary of her death is next week. 2 years. Noah and I usually spend the day at her grave, bringing flowers and talking about memories. This year, Noah asked if you could come. I told him probably not, but he insisted I ask. I don't know if this is me extending an invitation or just passing along Noah's request. Maybe both. Maybe I'm trying to figure out if there's a way forward that doesn't involve me being angry and you being absent. I don't know if forgiveness is possible, but maybe understanding is. If you want to come, we'll be at Millbrook Cemetery at 2 p.m. on December 21st. If you don't, I'll explain to Noah that you were busy. He'll be disappointed, but he'll understand. Either way, thank you for the scholarship. Thank you for seeing Noah's gift and making sure it didn't go to waste. Whatever else happened between us, that was good. That was real. Eli. Charlotte read the letter 3 times, then looked at the drawing again, at the empty space where she'd been, at the careful way Noah had left room for her to return. She picked up her phone, called Marcus. I need you to clear my schedule for December 21st. That's the donor gala. You're the keynote speaker. Then find someone else to speak. I have somewhere more important to be. Millbrook? Millbrook. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then, good. It's about time. Marcus? Yeah? What if I get there and he tells me to leave? Then you leave. But at least you tried. That's more than you usually do. Charlotte hung up and started planning. Not a strategic plan, not a business maneuver, just a simple plan. Show up, be honest, let Eli decide what happened next. It was terrifying in its simplicity, in the complete lack of control. But maybe that was the point. Maybe real connection meant giving up control, meant trusting someone else with your truth and hoping they didn't break it. The days until December 21st felt endless and too fast all at once. Charlotte tried to work, tried to focus, but her mind kept drifting to Millbrook, to Eli, to the conversation they'd have at a cemetery while marking the death of the woman he'd loved. On the morning of the 21st, Charlotte woke early and dressed carefully. Not in her CEO armor, but in simple clothes that wouldn't stand out. Jeans, a sweater, a coat that was warm but not expensive looking. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. No makeup, no designer labels, just a person trying to be present for something that mattered. The drive to Millbrook felt both familiar and foreign. She'd made it before, but that time she'd been running toward something. Now she was walking into uncertainty, into a moment that could either rebuild what she'd broken or shatter it beyond any repair. Millbrook Cemetery sat on a hill overlooking the town, a peaceful space with old trees and older headstones. Charlotte found it easily, parked her Honda beside Eli's truck, and took a moment to steady her breathing before getting out. They were already there, Eli and Noah standing beside a simple granite headstone, the boy holding a bouquet of flowers that looked hand-picked rather than store-bought. They hadn't seen her yet, and Charlotte took the opportunity to watch them, to see the way Eli's hand rested on Noah's shoulder, the way they stood together against the winter cold. Then Noah turned and saw her. His face lit up with uncomplicated joy, and he broke away from his father, running toward her with the flowers forgotten. "You came!" He crashed into her, wrapping his arms around her waist, and Charlotte held him, felt tears sting her eyes. "Dad said you might be busy, but I knew you'd come. I knew it." "I wouldn't miss it," Charlotte said, her voice rough. She looked up at Eli, who was watching with an expression she couldn't quite read. "If it's okay that I'm here." Eli studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "It's okay. Come on." Charlotte followed them to the headstone, read the inscription, "Sarah Marie Turner, beloved wife and mother. May her light guide us home." It was simple, honest, like everything else about Eli. "Mom would have liked you," Noah said, arranging his flowers at the base of the stone. "She always said Dad needed someone to make him smile, and you made him smile a lot. Before the sad part." "Noah," Eli started, but Charlotte shook her head. "He's right. There was a sad part. I made mistakes, hurt your dad, and I'm sorry for that." She knelt beside Noah, met his eyes. I should have been honest from the beginning. I should have told the truth. But you were scared, Noah said with the simple wisdom of children. People lie when they're scared. Dad says lying is wrong, but he also says sometimes people make bad choices for good reasons. Your dad's a smart man. He's the smartest and the best, and really bad at humming. Noah looked between them, his expression hopeful. Are you going to be friends again? Because I finished the drawing, but it doesn't work if you're not in it. That's up to your dad, Charlotte said, standing. She looked at Eli, at the careful walls he'd built around himself. I owe you both an apology. A real one. Not the kind I gave before where I made excuses, but an actual acknowledgement of what I did wrong. Okay, Eli said quietly. I'm listening. Charlotte took a breath, made herself vulnerable in a way she'd spent her whole life avoiding. I lied to you because I was afraid. Not of you, but of what you represented. You saved my life without asking for anything in return. And in my world, that doesn't happen. Everyone wants something. Everyone has an angle. So when you didn't, when you just disappeared after pulling me from that car, I needed to understand why. I needed to know if people could actually be good without wanting something back. And? Eli's expression was unreadable. And you were. You were exactly as good as I hoped, and it terrified me. Because if I'd come to you as Charlotte Pierce, billionaire CEO, you would have seen the money first and me second. So I became Lena, and for 3 weeks I got to be just a person. Someone you might like because of who I was, not what I had. But it was still a lie. It was. And I hurt you, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to be honest. I'm sorry I made you question whether what we had was real. Because it was real, Eli. Every conversation, every moment, every feeling, that was all real. The only thing fake was my name. Noah was watching them both with rapt attention, his young face serious. Are you going to hug now? When people apologize on TV, they always hug. Despite everything, Eli laughed. Life's not TV, buddy. But it should be. Hugging fixes things. Sometimes it does, Charlotte said. She looked at Eli, saw the conflict in his eyes. I know sorry isn't enough. I know trust takes time to rebuild. But if you're willing, I'd like to try. Not as Lena Shaw, not as Charlotte Pierce, CEO, just as Charlotte. The person I should have been from the beginning. Eli was quiet for so long Charlotte thought he'd say no. Then he stepped forward, closed the distance between them, and pulled her into a hug that felt like forgiveness and beginning and hope all at once. I missed you, he said into her hair, his voice barely audible. I was so angry, but I missed you every day. I missed you too. Charlotte held him tighter, felt 2 years of loneliness crack open and start to heal. Both of you. They stood there in the cemetery, the three of them, while winter wind moved through bare trees and somewhere in Millbrook a church bell rang the hour. It wasn't perfect. Charlotte's lies still hung between them, and trust would take time to fully rebuild. But it was honest. It was real. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Charlotte Pierce felt like she might actually deserve something good. They stayed at the cemetery for another hour, Noah chattering about his art classes while Charlotte and Eli stood close enough that their shoulders touched, a small contact that carried the weight of reconciliation. The winter sun slanted through the bare trees, casting long shadows across the graves, and Charlotte found herself talking to Sarah's headstone, telling her about Noah's gift and promising to look after them both. She'd appreciate that, Eli said quietly, as they walked back toward their vehicles. Sarah always worried about what would happen to Noah if something happened to me. Said she needed to know he'd have someone. He has you. That's what matters. For now. But kids need more than one person. Eli paused beside his truck, his hand on the door handle. We should talk, really talk. Not here, not with Noah listening, but somewhere we can figure out what this is. What do you want it to be? He looked at her, and Charlotte saw all the fear and hope and uncertainty she felt mirrored in his eyes. I don't know yet, but I know I want to try. That's something, right? That's everything. They made plans to meet for dinner the following evening, just the two of them, at the pot roast place where they'd had their first real date when she was still pretending to be someone else. Noah hugged Charlotte goodbye with an intensity that suggested he was afraid she might disappear again, and she promised him she wouldn't, that she was done running. The drive back to Pittsburgh felt different than any drive Charlotte had made in her life. Not running towards something or away from something, just existing in the space between moments, letting herself feel uncertain and hopeful and terrified all at once. Marcus was waiting in her office when she arrived, perched on her desk with a tablet showing emails that had piled up during her absence. How'd it go? Good, scary, real. Charlotte dropped into her chair, felt the familiar leather mold to her back. We're having dinner tomorrow, actually talking about what happens next. And what do you want to happen next? I want him. I want Noah. I want the messy, complicated reality of building something that matters. She looked at Marcus, at her friend who'd watched her build an empire but had never seen her happy. But I don't know how to make that work with this. She gestured around the office, at the life she'd constructed. So change it. You're Charlotte Pierce. You've restructured entire companies. Restructuring your life should be easy. Nothing about this is easy. No, Marcus agreed, but the hard things are usually the ones worth doing. That night, Charlotte sat in her penthouse and made lists. Not strategic plans or business proposals, but honest assessments of what she wanted and what she was willing to sacrifice to get it. The company would survive without her constant presence. She'd built it too well for it to fail just because she stepped back. The board would complain, but boards always complained. What mattered was whether she could live with herself if she let fear of change keep her from the first real happiness she'd felt in years. By morning, she had a plan. Not a manipulation or a strategic move, just an honest offer of who she was and what she could give. The pot roast place was exactly as Charlotte remembered. Worn booths, checkered tablecloths, the smell of comfort food, and the low hum of people enjoying simple meals. Eli was already there when she arrived, sitting in the same booth they'd shared before, and the sight of him made her heart do complicated things in her chest. "You're early," she said, sliding in across from him. "So are you. Guess we're both nervous." Terrified, actually. "Good. I'd hate to be the only one." He smiled, but Charlotte could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped his water glass like it might save him from drowning. "I've been thinking about what I want to say to you for weeks. Now that you're here, it's all gone." "Then don't say anything rehearsed. Just tell me what you're feeling." Eli took a breath, set down his glass. "I'm angry at you for lying. I'm grateful to you for the scholarship. I'm scared of trusting you again. I'm more scared of not trying." He met her eyes. "And I can't stop thinking about you. I tried. God knows I tried, but every morning I wake up and you're the first thing I think about. Every time something good happens, I want to tell you. Noah drew this picture yesterday of a sunset, and my first instinct was to take a photo and send it to you, except I deleted your number because I was trying to move on. Did it work? Moving on?" "Not even a little bit." He reached across the table, took her hand. "So here's what I need from you. Honesty. Complete, uncomfortable, no excuses honesty. If we're going to try this, I need to know who you really are. Not Lena, not the CEO version you show the world, just Charlotte." "That's scarier than you think." "I know, but I need it anyway." Their food arrived. Pot roast for both, the kind of meal that anchored you to the earth. And Charlotte took a moment to gather her thoughts, to figure out how to explain a lifetime of armor and distance to a man who led with his heart. "I've spent my whole adult life being Charlotte Pierce, CEO," she started, "building the company, making deals, winning, and somewhere along the way, I forgot how to be just Charlotte. I forgot what it felt like to have someone care about me instead of what I could do for them. When you saved me from that accident, you didn't know who I was. You just saw someone who needed help, and you helped. No agenda, no angle, just basic human decency. That's not exactly rare. In my world, it is. Everything's transactional. Every kindness has a price. So when I woke up in the hospital and realized I'd been saved by a stranger who'd disappeared, I needed to understand why. I hired an investigator, found out who you were, and I should have just come to you honestly. But I was afraid you'd treat me differently if you knew about the money, that you'd see the billions instead of the person. So you lied. So I lied. And I convinced myself it was necessary, that I was protecting something precious. But really, I was just being a coward. Charlotte squeezed his hand, held his gaze. I'm not proud of it, Eli. I hurt you, hurt Noah, and I'm sorrier than I know how to express. But being with you, pretending to be Lena, that was the most honest I've been in years. Everything I told you about what I wanted, who I wanted to be, that was all true. The only lie was my name. Eli was quiet, processing. Then, tell me something true right now. Something you've never told anyone. Charlotte thought about all the truths she'd buried, all the vulnerabilities she'd hidden. I'm lonely. I have money and power and success, but I come home every night to an empty apartment, and I can't remember the last time someone touched me without wanting something. When you held my hand in that car, when you told me I was going to be okay, that was the first time in years that I felt like someone actually saw me. And I've been chasing that feeling ever since. That's why you came to Millbrook. That's why I stayed. I could have just written you a check, sent a thank you note, moved on with my life. But I didn't want to move on. I wanted to know you. She stopped, made herself say it. I wanted to be loved by someone who didn't care about my bank account. And now? Now I'm sitting here being completely honest for maybe the first time in my life, and I'm terrified you're going to tell me it's too late. Eli was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. It's not too late. But Charlotte, I need you to understand something. I'm not a project. I'm not something you can fix or save or add to your portfolio of good deeds. I'm just a guy trying to raise his kid and keep his head above water, and I don't have the energy for games. I'm not playing games, not anymore. Then what are you doing? I'm trying to be brave enough to want something that scares me. Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes. I'm trying to believe I deserve something real, even though I screwed it up the first time. I'm trying to convince you to give me another chance. What would that look like? Another chance? You live in Pittsburgh running a billion-dollar company. I live in Millbrook fixing cars. How does this work? I don't know, but I'm willing to figure it out if you are. They ate in silence for a while, both thinking about logistics and complications and all the practical reasons why this shouldn't work. But Charlotte had spent her whole life being practical, and it had left her alone in a tower of glass and steel. For once, she wanted impractical. She wanted messy and complicated and real. I have a proposal, she said finally. And before you say no, just hear me out. I'm listening. I step back from the company. Not completely, but significantly. I promote Marcus to COO, let him handle day-to-day operations. I keep my seat on the board, stay involved in major decisions, but I'm not working 60-hour weeks anymore. And I spend more time in Millbrook. I get an apartment, something small, nothing that screams money. I become part of the community instead of a tourist. And we date. Properly. Honestly. We figure out if what we had was real or just the fantasy of who I was pretending to be. Eli stared at her. You'd give up your company? I'm not giving it up. I'm just stopping letting it be my entire life. There's a difference. Charlotte leaned forward, urgent. Eli, I built that company because I needed to prove I was worth more than my father's legacy. I needed to win, but I've won. I've proven whatever I needed to prove, and now I'm asking myself what comes next, and the answer is this. You, Noah. A life that means something beyond quarterly earnings. What if it doesn't work? What if we try and it falls apart? Then at least we tried. At least I was brave enough to want something more than success. She smiled, shaky but genuine. Besides, failure's not that scary once you've been pulled from a burning car by a stranger who wouldn't take no for an answer. It wasn't burning. Felt like it was. Eli laughed despite himself, and Charlotte felt something in her chest unknot. You're serious about this? About Millbrook? Completely serious. I've already talked to Marcus about restructuring. We're meeting with the board next week to present the transition plan. I'm not asking permission, I'm informing them. They'll adjust. And if they fire you? Then I'll find something else to do. Maybe open a small gallery in Millbrook. God knows the town could use some culture beyond the library bulletin board. She was only half joking. The idea of scaling down, of focusing on art for art's sake instead of profit margins, was surprisingly appealing. The point is, I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you, if you'll let me. Eli studied her face, searching for something. Whatever he found must have satisfied him because he smiled, slow, and genuine. Okay. Okay? Okay, let's try. But Charlotte, I need you to know this isn't going to be easy. We're from different worlds. Noah's going to have questions I don't know how to answer. The town's going to gossip. Henderson's probably going to try to sell your story to some reality TV producer. Let them gossip. I've survived hostile takeovers and corporate espionage. I can handle small-town gossip. Charlotte squeezed his hand. I'm not expecting easy. I'm just expecting real. They finished dinner making plans, talking through logistics and concerns, and all the practical details that came with trying to merge two incompatible lives. It wasn't perfect. There were still gaps they'd have to bridge, wounds that would take time to heal. But it was honest. It was a start. Eli walked her to her car afterward, and they stood in the parking lot under sodium lights, neither quite ready to leave. I want to kiss you, Eli said, but I'm not sure if we're there yet. I think we're wherever we decide we are. He kissed her then, gentle and searching, and Charlotte felt something in her chest crack open and flood with light. It wasn't the passionate kiss of new romance or the comfortable kiss of long-term partnership. It was something in between, something uncertain and hopeful, and weighted with the knowledge that they were building something fragile that could either grow strong or shatter completely. When they pulled apart, Eli was smiling. For the record, that was better than the first time. We had a first time? In my head we did. I've been replaying it for weeks. How did it go in your head? Pretty much exactly like that, except you were still Lena and I didn't have all this baggage about trust. Baggage is good. Means we're real people with real histories. Charlotte touched his face, traced the line of his jaw. I'm going to screw this up sometimes. I'm going to be too focused on work, or too afraid to be vulnerable, or too something, but I promise I'll try. And I promise I won't lie to you again. That's all I need. The trying, the honesty. He kissed her forehead. Go home. Get some sleep. Tomorrow you can start figuring out how to become a Millbrook resident without causing a town-wide panic. Charlotte drove back to Pittsburgh feeling lighter than she had in months. The penthouse was waiting, cold and empty as always, but for the first time it felt temporary, like a place she was leaving rather than a prison she'd built. The board meeting the following week was exactly as contentious as Charlotte expected. She stood in front of 12 men and women who'd made fortunes betting on her instincts and told them she was stepping back. This isn't a resignation, she said, watching their faces cycle through shock, anger, and calculation. I'm remaining on the board, maintaining majority ownership, and staying involved in major strategic decisions. But I'm promoting Marcus Chen to COO and shifting to a more advisory role. The company's strong enough to survive without me micromanaging every decision. With all due respect, Mrs. Pierce, Henderson from Acquisition said, and Charlotte had learned that with all due respect always preceded something disrespectful. You built this company on your vision. Stepping back now sends a message that you've lost faith. I haven't lost faith in the company. I've gained faith in something else. Charlotte met his eyes, refused to flinch. I nearly died 4 months ago. That changes your perspective. Makes you realize that building an empire means nothing if you have no one to share it with. So this is about a man. James spoke up from his seat at the far end of the table, his expression unreadable. The mechanic from Millbrook. This is about choosing to have a life instead of just a career. If you want to reduce that to being about a man, that's your choice. But I'm not asking permission. I'm informing you of a change in operational structure. Marcus is more than capable of running day-to-day operations. He's been doing half my job for years anyway. Marcus, sitting beside her, gave a small nod of agreement. They'd rehearsed this, prepared for every objection, but Charlotte could still feel the room's resistance like a physical force. What happens when this relationship ends? Another board member, Patricia Lim, asked the question with the clinical detachment of someone analyzing a merger. You've restructured the entire company around a personal decision. If it falls apart, you'll want back in, and by then Marcus will have established himself. We'll have competing leadership. Then we'll deal with it, like adults, like the highly paid professionals we all pretend to be. Charlotte smiled without warmth. I'm 40 years old. I've built this company from a small gallery into a global operation. I've earned the right to have a personal life. If any of you disagree, you're welcome to sell your shares. I'll buy them myself." The meeting continued for another 2 hours, but Charlotte had won before it started. She owned controlling interest, had the loyalty of key staff, and most importantly, she had the confidence of someone who'd already survived the worst things she could imagine. Corporate politics couldn't touch her anymore. Afterward, James cornered her in the hallway. That was brutal. That was necessary. Charlotte gathered her papers, ready to leave. "They'll adjust. They always do." "Charlotte," James caught her arm, made her look at him. "Are you sure about this? You've never been the settling down type. What happens when you get bored in Millbrook? When the novelty wears off and you're stuck in a small town with a mechanic and his kid?" "Then I'll be stuck in a small town with people who actually care about me. Sounds terrible." "I'm serious." "So am I." Charlotte softened, recognized her brother's concern for what it was, love, even if he expressed it badly. "James, I've been miserable for years. I just hit it well. Maybe this won't work. Maybe I'll hate small-town life and Eli will realize I'm too damaged for a real relationship. But at least I'll have tried. At least I'll know what it feels like to choose something other than success. I just don't want you to get hurt. I'm already hurt. I've been hurt for years. This is me trying to heal." She left him standing in the hallway and went home to start packing. Not everything. The penthouse would remain hers, an anchor to return to when she needed the city. But enough to fill an apartment in Millbrook, enough to signal that she was serious about building a life there. Marcus helped her sort through years of accumulated possessions, making piles of what to keep, donate, or store. "You're really doing this," he said, watching her pack books into boxes. "Moving to a town of 2,000 people to date a widowed mechanic. When you say it like that, it sounds insane. Because it is insane. It's also the sanest thing you've done in years." Marcus handed her another book, a coffee table volume on modern art that had never been opened. "For what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice." "Yeah?" "Yeah. You've been half alive since I've known you. Maybe this guy can make you whole." That's a lot of pressure to put on one person. Good thing he's already proven he can handle pressure. He pulled you from a burning car, remember? It wasn't burning. Details. Charlotte found an apartment a week later, a modest 2-bedroom on the second floor of an old Victorian that had been converted into units. It had hardwood floors and high ceilings and windows that looked out over Maple Street, where kids played and neighbors waved to each other, and life happened at a pace slow enough to actually observe. She moved in on a Saturday, and within hours, half of Millbrook had found reasons to walk past, to catch a glimpse of the billionaire who'd chosen their town. Eli and Noah showed up around noon with sandwiches from Rosie's and mussels for carrying boxes. "Town's buzzing," Eli said, hauling a box labeled kitchen up the stairs. Mrs. Patterson told Henderson, who told Rosie, who told everyone that Charlotte Pierce bought the old Morrison apartment. "I think we're the most interesting thing that's happened since the Pizza Hut closed." "Sorry about that." "Don't be. I'm enjoying being the guy who's dating the billionaire. Makes me sound more interesting than I am." "You're interesting enough without my bank account." They spent the afternoon unpacking while Noah explored the apartment, claiming the second bedroom as his own for weekends when he stayed over. Charlotte watched him arrange his art supplies on the built-in shelves and felt something settle in her chest, something like belonging. "This is weird, right?" Eli asked later when Noah was distracted with hanging drawings. "You living here. Us doing this. Completely weird." "But good weird?" "The best kind of weird." Charlotte kissed him, brief and sweet. "Thank you for giving me a chance. Thank you for being brave enough to take it." The first few weeks were an adjustment. Charlotte had to learn how to live at Millbrook's pace, how to stop checking her phone every 5 minutes, how to have conversations with neighbors that weren't networking opportunities. She attended town council meetings and volunteered at the library and learned that community wasn't something you bought your way into. It was something you built through showing up day after day until people stopped seeing the money and started seeing the person. Eli had his own adjustments to make. Dating someone with Charlotte's resources meant navigating questions about who paid for dinner, how to handle the obvious wealth disparity, what it meant for their future. They fought about it once, a real fight where voices were raised and doors were slammed when Eli found out Charlotte had quietly paid off his mortgage. I told you I didn't want your money, he said, pacing her small living room while Charlotte sat on the couch trying not to cry. I told you I needed to handle my own problems. It wasn't charity, it was removing an obstacle so you could breathe. It was you deciding what I needed without asking me. Again. That's exactly what you did before, Charlotte. Deciding what I should know and when I should know it. You're right. I'm sorry. I have all this money sitting there doing nothing while you're working yourself to death paying off a house you already own. It seems stupid not to help. But it's not your choice to make, it's mine. Eli stopped pacing, ran his hands through his hair. I need to be able to take care of myself and Noah. I need to feel like I'm contributing something besides being your small-town redemption project. Is that what you think you are? I don't know what I am. That's the problem. He sat beside her, deflated. I love you. I think I've loved you since you bought me lunch and didn't make it weird. But Charlotte, I need to know you see me as an equal, not someone to fix or save or manage. I do see you as an equal, but Eli, we're not equal financially. That's just reality. I have money, you don't, and pretending that doesn't matter is dishonest. The question is whether we can build something despite that imbalance. How? By you telling me when I overstep, by me asking instead of assuming, by both of us being uncomfortable sometimes because that's what real relationships are. Constant negotiation between two people who love each other but don't always agree. They worked it out eventually, establishing boundaries and expectations, and agreeing that Charlotte would consult Eli before making any financial decisions that affected him. It wasn't perfect, nothing about merging their lives was perfect, but it was honest. It was real. Noah's 9th birthday fell in February, and Charlotte helped Eli plan a party at their apartment. They invited Noah's classmates and his teachers from the institute, and half of Millbrook showed up, cramming into the small space with homemade dishes and genuine affection for the boy who'd lost his mother but hadn't lost his light. Watching Noah blow out his candles, surrounded by people who loved him, Charlotte felt something shift inside her. This was what she'd been missing, not the party itself, but the feeling of being part of something bigger than herself, of contributing to a community instead of just consuming. You okay? Eli asked, finding her in the kitchen where she'd escaped to start washing dishes. More than okay. I'm happy. Good. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, rested his chin on her shoulder. Noah asked me something today. About you. What? He asked when you were going to officially be his family. Eli's voice was careful, like he was approaching something fragile. I told him these things take time, but he pointed out that it's been almost 4 months and you're already basically living together. What did you tell him? That I'd talk to you. Eli turned her around, kept his hands on her waist. Charlotte, I know we're still figuring things out. I know there's still trust being rebuilt, but I love you. Noah loves you, and I don't want to wait anymore to make this official. Official how? Instead of answering, he pulled a small box from his pocket. Not a ring box, too flat, but something small and carefully wrapped. Open it. Inside was a key, simple, brass, worn at the edges like it had been used for years. It's to my house, Eli said. The one I shared with Sarah where Noah grew up, where I've lived my entire adult life. I want you to have it. I want you to make it yours. I want us to be a family for real, not just dating, but actually building a life together. Charlotte stared at the key, felt tears blur her vision. Are you asking me to move in? I'm asking you to marry me, eventually, when we're both ready. But first I'm asking you to move in, to be Noah's step-parent, to help me raise him and figure out how to be happy again. Eli cupped her face, made her look at him. I know you have your apartment. Keep it if you want, for when you need space or have to go back to Pittsburgh for business. But make the house your home too. Make us your home. Yes. Charlotte didn't have to think about it. Yes to all of it. Moving in, being Noah's parent, eventually marrying you, all of it. They kissed while in the next room the party continued, children laughing and adults talking and life happening in all its messy glory. And Charlotte thought about the yellow pencil that had started everything, about the accident that had broken her body but somehow fixed her soul, about the man who'd saved her life twice, once from a wreck and once from herself. Moving into Eli's house was both easier and harder than Charlotte expected. Easier because the physical act of combining households was simple. She'd learned to live light in her apartment, and most of her belongings fit into Eli's house without requiring massive reorganization. Harder because everywhere she looked, she saw evidence of Sarah. Photos on the walls, her handwriting on old grocery lists tucked into kitchen drawers, the garden she'd planted out back that Eli maintained like a shrine. "I'm not trying to replace her," Charlotte said one evening, watching Eli water Sarah's roses. "I need you to know that." "I know. And she's not replaceable. But Charlotte, you're not competing with a ghost. You're just—" He paused, searching for words. "You're writing the next chapter. Sarah was chapter 1. You're chapter 2. The story continues." What if Noah doesn't see it that way? Noah sees you as the person who looks at his art like it matters, who helps him with homework and comes to his baseball games and doesn't try to be his mom, but doesn't pretend Sarah didn't exist either. That's all he needs. But Charlotte worried anyway, hyper-aware of every decision she made about the house, every boundary she might be crossing. It took Noah himself to finally cut through her anxiety. They were in the kitchen one Saturday morning, Charlotte making pancakes while Noah drew at the table. Out of nowhere, he said, "You can put up your pictures, you know." "What?" "Your pictures. From your apartment. Dad keeps saying this is your house too, but all the pictures are still of Mom. You should put up some of yours, so it feels like you're home." Charlotte felt her throat tighten. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable." "Why would I be uncomfortable? I like your pictures. And Mom's not here anymore. She'd want the house to have new pictures." He said it with the straightforward logic of children, cutting through complications to simple truth. "Dad talks to her sometimes. At night when he thinks I'm asleep. He tells her about you, says she'd like you." "Did she tell him anything back?" "I don't think ghosts work like that. But Dad seems happier after, so maybe she does." Noah looked up from his drawing, his expression serious. "I'm glad you're here. I'm glad Dad's not sad all the time anymore. And I'm glad you're teaching me about art and helping with homework and all the other stuff that parents do." "You're glad I'm being a parent?" "Yeah. Is that okay?" Charlotte had to sit down, had to press her hand to her chest where her heart was doing complicated things. "That's more than okay. That's perfect." They hung Charlotte's pictures that afternoon, modern prints she'd collected over the years, photographs from her travels, a small watercolor Noah had made for her birthday. The house transformed, becoming a blend of Sarah's memory and Charlotte's presence, and somehow it worked. Somehow the past and present coexisted without erasing each other. Spring came to Millbrook with sudden intensity, trees exploding into green and flowers carpet-bombing yards with color. Charlotte's Gallery in Pittsburgh launched a new exhibition featuring emerging artists, including 3 pieces by Noah Turner that sold within hours of opening. The success brought reporters asking questions about the 9-year-old prodigy, and Charlotte had to navigate protecting Noah's privacy while celebrating his talent. "This is what your life is always like, isn't it?" Eli asked, watching her handle a persistent reporter over the phone. "Constant management. Constant decisions." "Used to be. Now it's just occasional management. Mostly I get to focus on the good parts, finding talent, building artists' careers, making sure beautiful things find people who'll appreciate them." "Including me?" "Especially you." Charlotte ended the call, turned her full attention to him. "Though you're less finding talent and more being constantly amazed by your talent for fixing things, cars, broken toys, broken billionaires." "You weren't broken, just a little bent. I was a mess. I'm still kind of a mess." "Yeah, but you're my mess now." He pulled her close, kissed her forehead. "Speaking of which, Noah's at a sleepover. We have the house to ourselves. Want to do something scandalous like watch an R-rated movie or eat ice cream for dinner?" "I was thinking something even more scandalous." "Yeah?" "Yeah. Let's talk about wedding plans." They'd been engaged for 2 months. Eli had proposed properly on the anniversary of the day they'd met, with a ring he'd designed himself and Noah's enthusiastic approval. But they'd been too busy living life to focus on planning a wedding. Now, with spring in full bloom and their relationship solid enough to withstand scrutiny, it felt like time. "Small wedding," Eli said immediately. "I don't want a spectacle." "Neither do I. Just family and close friends, maybe the backyard." Under the oak tree where we had our first real conversation? The oak tree where I fixed your tire and you lied about your name? That's the one. Scene of the crime and the beginning of everything good. They planned it for June, which gave them 3 months to organize what Charlotte insisted would be a simple ceremony. But simple was relative when you were Charlotte Pierce, and by the time invitations went out, the guest list had grown to include Marcus, James, and his wife Margaret, Noah's teachers from the Institute, Henderson and Rosie, and half of Millbrook, and a handful of artists Charlotte had worked with over the years. "This is not small," Eli said, looking at the seating chart Charlotte had drawn up. "This is a medium-sized concert. It's intimate by my standards. My father's funeral had 400 people, and half of them I'd never met. That's deeply depressing. That was my life before you. Now I get to have a wedding where I actually know and like everyone invited. That's progress." The weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of preparations and work and the daily business of being a family. Charlotte learned to navigate Noah's moods and Eli's stubbornness. Eli learned that Charlotte's version of "I'll just check my email quick" meant an hour of work. Noah learned that having 2 parents meant twice the homework help and twice the people saying no to late-night video games. They settled into rhythms, into routines, into the comfortable friction of people learning to share space and lives. It wasn't always easy. Charlotte's work still demanded travel sometimes, and Eli's insecurity about the wealth gap surfaced when she'd been gone too long. But they talked through it, fought through it, came out the other side stronger. A week before the wedding, Noah got sick. Not seriously, just a spring cold that hit hard, but enough to send him to bed with a fever and complaints that his body hurt everywhere. Charlotte sat with him while Eli ran to the pharmacy for medicine, reading aloud from one of Noah's art books and making him laugh with terrible British accents for all the artist quotes. "You're going to be my real mom soon," Noah said when she'd finished reading. His voice was hoarse from coughing, but his eyes were clear and serious. "I'm going to be your stepmom. Your real mom was Sarah. She'll always be your real mom." "Can I have 2 real moms?" Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes. "Yeah, kiddo, I think you can." "Good. Because I need 2. One to remember and one to be with me." He snuggled deeper into his blankets, his small face flushed with fever. "Do you think Mom would be okay with you marrying Dad?" "I think she'd be happy your dad found someone to love, and I think she'd be glad you have someone to take care of you." "Do you love us? Like really love us? Not just because Dad saved your life?" "I love you both more than I knew it was possible to love anyone. Your dad's kindness gave me a reason to be better. Your art reminds me why beautiful things matter. You're both—" She had to stop, collect herself. "You're both the best things that ever happened to me." Noah smiled, already starting to drift towards sleep. "Good. Because you're one of the best things that happened to us too. Even when Dad was mad about the lying, he was still thinking about you. He's bad at pretending he doesn't care." Charlotte stayed until he was fully asleep, then went downstairs to find Eli had returned with enough cold medicine to treat a small army. "How is he?" "Asleep, sweet, asking hard questions about whether Sarah would approve of us." "What'd you tell him?" "That she'd be happy we found each other." Charlotte took the pharmacy bags from Eli, started organizing medicine. He asked if he could have 2 real moms. And I said yes, because he can. Because Sarah's part of him and I'm becoming part of him, and those things don't cancel each other out. Eli pulled her close, held her in the middle of the kitchen where Sarah had cooked 1,000 meals, and Charlotte was learning to cook her own. "I love you, in case I don't say it enough." "You say it plenty, but I never get tired of hearing it." "Good, because I'm planning to say it for the next 50 years. The wedding day arrived with perfect June weather, the sky impossibly blue and the air scented with roses and fresh-cut grass. Charlotte dressed in her childhood bedroom at James's rented house. He'd insisted on flying in early to give her away properly, in a simple ivory dress that cost less than any of her business suits but felt more valuable. "You look beautiful," Margaret said, adjusting Charlotte's hair. "Not CEO beautiful. Actually, happy beautiful. That's because I am happy. Terrified, but happy. All brides are terrified. It means you're taking it seriously." Margaret stepped back, surveyed her work. "Charlotte, I've known you for 10 years. I've watched you build an empire and close impossible deals and never once look satisfied. Today you look satisfied. Whatever this man did to you, I approve. He saved my life. Twice. Then I doubly approve. James walked her down the makeshift aisle they'd created in Eli's backyard, past folding chairs filled with people who genuinely cared about her future. The ceremony was short and sweet, officiated by a justice of the peace who'd known Eli since birth and had no problem gently roasting both bride and groom during the vows. Eli Turner, you're marrying a woman who owns buildings taller than this entire town. Charlotte Pierce, you're marrying a man who owns exactly one nice shirt and is currently wearing it. This is either the best decision you've both ever made or the plot of a romantic comedy. I'm betting on the former. They said their vows, traditional ones because both of them had been too emotional to write custom ones without crying, and exchanged rings. Eli's was simple platinum. Charlotte's was vintage with small diamonds that had belonged to Sarah's grandmother. Eli had asked Sarah's parents for permission to use it, and they'd cried and said yes and told Charlotte they were happy their son-in-law had found love again. When the justice pronounced them married, Eli kissed Charlotte like they were the only two people in the world, and the backyard erupted in applause and whooping, Henderson's distinctive whistle cutting through everything else. The reception was exactly as chaotic and perfect as Charlotte had hoped. Rosie had catered, insisting she wouldn't let some fancy Pittsburgh caterer ruin a Millbrook wedding. They ate pot roast and danced to music from a Bluetooth speaker, and Noah gave a speech that was mostly about how glad he was to have a stepmom who knew about good artists and didn't make him eat vegetables at every meal. I may have oversold that last part, Charlotte whispered to Eli as they danced to a song she didn't recognize. Too late now. You're stuck with us. Best trap I ever fell into. They danced until the sun set, until someone lit the fire pit and people gathered around it with drinks and stories. Charlotte found herself sitting between Marcus and Henderson, listening to them argue about whether the Steelers had any chance next season, and realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this content. You did good, Marcus said quietly, watching Eli play catch with Noah and some other kids on the darkening lawn. I wasn't sure at first, thought maybe you were having some kind of breakdown, but this is right. You're right. I'm happy. Is that allowed? For you, it should always have been allowed. You just finally figured out how to let it in. As the night wound down and guests started leaving, Charlotte and Eli found themselves alone on the porch, watching stars emerge in the clear sky. Noah had fallen asleep inside on the couch, worn out from excitement and still recovering from his cold. So we did it, Eli said. Got married. You're officially Mrs. Turner. I'm keeping Pierce professionally, but personally? Yeah, I'm Charlotte Turner. How weird is that? The best kind of weird. He pulled her closer, and Charlotte rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. Thank you. For what? For coming back, after I told you to leave, after I was angry and hurt and stupid. You could have stayed in Pittsburgh and sent checks and kept your distance. But you came back. You fought for this. You're worth fighting for, both of you. Charlotte thought about the yellow pencil still tucked in her desk drawer, about the flannel shirt she'd kept from the accident, about all the small moments that had led to this one. You saved my life that day on Route 402, but you saved it again when you let me back in, when you gave me a chance to be real. You saved mine too. I was drowning before you, just going through motions. You reminded me that life could be more than just survival. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the last of the guests drive away, listening to Millbrook settle in for the night. Somewhere a dog barked. A car engine turned over. Life continuing in its small, perfect ways. What are you thinking about? Eli asked. That I started this year dying in a car crash, and I'm ending it married to the man who saved me. That I went from having everything and feeling empty to having less and feeling full. That sometimes the best things that happen to you start with the worst moments. She turned to look at him. And that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Me too. Eli kissed her, soft and sure. Me too. Inside, Noah stirred on the couch, and they went to carry him to bed together, moving through the house with the easy coordination of people learning to be a family. Charlotte tucked him in while Eli turned off lights. And when they finally collapsed into their own bed, their bed now, not his bed or her space, but something shared, Charlotte thought about how far she'd traveled from that November morning in the fog. She'd been looking for the man who saved her life, and she'd found him. But more than that, she'd found herself. The version of Charlotte Pierce who could be happy with simple things, who could value connection over conquest, who could finally believe she deserved to be loved, not for what she had, but for who she was. The yellow pencil still sat in her desk drawer, a reminder of where she'd been and how far she'd come. Sometimes she'd take it out and hold it, remembering the sound of Eli's voice in the fog, the warmth of his hand when she'd been so cold, the way he'd looked at her like she was worth saving, even when she'd thought she wasn't worth anything at all. She'd come to Millbrook searching for a stranger who'd shown her kindness. She'd found a family, a home, and a version of herself that she'd thought was lost forever. And under the crooked oak tree where they'd first really met, where they'd spoken their vows and promised their futures, she'd finally drawn the light back into her life. Not the harsh fluorescent glare of success, but the warm, steady glow of belonging. They'd all three drawn the light together, and it was beautiful.